Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of West Berkshire Council's Eastern Area Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Alan McCrow, and I'm Chair of the committee. The other members of the committee present are Richard Sodner, who's the Vice Chair, Jeremy Cottam, Jeff Mays, Justin Pemberton, Clive Taylor, Ross McKinnon, and Vicky Poole. The following council officers are also in attendance to advise us and to support the meeting. Simon Till, who's Team Leader, Development Control. Michael Butler, Principal Planning Officer. Lewis Richards, Planning Officer. Gemma Kirk, Senior Planning Officer. Sharon Armour, Principal Lawyer, Planning and Governance. Gareth Dowding, Principal Engineer, who I think will be joining us via Zoom. Ben Ryan, Clerk. Stephen Chard, who's our Zoom host this evening, Brian Little, Planning Policy Manager, and Cheryl Willett, Senior Planning Officer. Before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present in the council chamber. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Please can I ask everyone present in the chamber to make sure you switch on your microphones when you wish to speak directly into the microphone, and to switch them off when you've finished. Can I also ask to make sure you put your mobile phones on silent or have turn them off, and also to turn off the sound on your tablets or laptops. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route and follow any instructions given by the officers. So the fire exit is in that corner of the room. The assembly point is a car park of the Dolphin Pub. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await instructions from officers. We will adjourn the meeting until such time as it's safe to proceed. Do any members have any questions about the way this meeting is being conducted before we proceed? Thank you. I should perhaps say that the voting is limited to the councillors present in the chamber. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies. Do we have any apologies, please?
Yes, Chairman, we've received apologies from Councillor Paul Kander.
Thank you. We move on then, please, to item 2, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of July 2023. And before we discuss that, I'd like to thank Councillor Clive Taylor for chairing that meeting in my absence and the absence of the Vice Chair. So thank you very much, and particularly since there's a particularly controversial item on the agenda that evening. So are there any, does anybody want to make any comments on the minutes? Councillor Poole.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've noticed a few alterations that I'd like to propose, please. So on 34, I was acquainted with Nigel Toon rather than Nigel Hopes, as stated within the document. I'd also like to note that the clarification on applicant representation number 12, music will be stopped at 11:45, whereas on condition 6, it notes that all music will stop by 11 p.m. So I think that's a typo that I'd like to be corrected. And I think just one moment, Chair. There was another one on page 18 of the document within the conditions. Councillor Kander noted some comments about the fire regulations for persons in wheelchairs that I think has been omitted. I had planned to ask him about his whether or not he identified the specific wording that seems to be removed or seems to be omitted from that area.
Yeah, just one.
Councillor Taylor.
Just one correction, Chair. Councillors present should include Jane Langford on the very first page.
Are other members content with those changes?
In terms of the condition, that's already been issued, I understand, so it won't be able to be amended. I think fire regulations are normally building regs anyway, aren't they? But the condition, yeah, we can note it in the minutes that you've said that, but it can't be amended since the decision's already gone out.
Yeah. Are the members content with the other changes that Councillor Poole has requested? Thank you. Does that find a seconder, please? Councillor Taylor, thank you very much. Those in favour, please. That's carried. Thank you. We move on to item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members wish to make a declaration of interest? Councillor Somner.
I do, Chair. Thank you. With application number 3 specifically in mind, to declare that I am known to Mr. Whale, who will be speaking to the application later on. It's a personal interest and a small interest in his business. We've had no conversations at all about the application this evening.
Thank you. In that case, can we move on to item 4?
Sorry, Chairman, I have a declaration to make, please. In relation to item 1, I've received extensive briefings from the council as landowner. I think that will probably go for Councillor Poole as well. And in relation to item 3, as the ward member, I have met with the applicant to discuss the planning process. I've not formed a view on the application and will listen to proceedings with an open mind.
Thank you. Any other declarations? Councillor Poole.
Thank you. Yes, I've hosted a councillor surgery with regards to item 1 so that I could gather the thoughts and feelings of the people within the ward. It has not swayed my decision and I'll approach tonight's meeting with an open mind.
Thank you. Can we move on then to item 4 on the agenda, which is application 23/01552/Reg 3. Reg 3 is because it's a council application, I believe. So first of all, could I ask council officers to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, before the case officer presents this application, I would like to make a brief statement on behalf of your officers. Chairman, officers recognise the tragic events of a few years ago surrounding the death of PC Harper that are public knowledge and have been raised in objections to this application. We would like to express our deepest sympathies for all of those attending or watching who were affected by that tragedy. While recognising the tragedy, I would like to remind those attending that the purpose of this meeting is to examine the planning merits of the applications being considered tonight. Thank you, Chairman. I'll pass you over to the case officer to present the application now.
Everyone hear me all right? Yeah. Thank you, Simon. So this application before committee tonight is at 4 Houses Corner. The reason it's come to committee is because the council has received in excess of 5 objections and officers are recommending conditional approval. Just to remind members and the public, the application is for the erection of 17 pitches on site for travellers with associated day rooms, improved access and public open space. So the red line here depicts the application site. It's an isolated site in the open countryside. Just to remind members, it has an extant permission for 18 pitches. So although the site is currently vacant, as the photographs will show, the use has definitely not been abandoned. Moving to page 26 of the agenda. Obviously, I'm not going to read through the whole report. It will simply be a summary of the, hang on, sorry. Just trying to bring up the next slide. Which doesn't seem to be coming up. Don't know if you can help, Gemma, please. No. I'll carry on with the presentation anyway. Thank you. So, as I said, the purpose of this committee report is to consider the proposed development as submitted. There will be 17 permanent gypsy and traveller pitches on the site, assuming, of course, the application is approved. There will be associated car parking spaces, as you can see. There will be day rooms, which appear as the buildings on the block plan here, and an improved vehicular access to the north with improved sight lines. There'll be a total of 38 parking spaces on site as well. As I mentioned, the application site lies in the open countryside, and about half a mile to the southwest of Burfield Common. There's a section in the report about the caravans legislation. I won't go through that in any detail, but officers are prepared to answer any questions on that. In terms of the planning history, in 1981, the site got its original permission for 21 pitches. And subsequent to that, there was another application for 20 pitches. And the identified number following that was for 18 pitches. Section 3 covers the legal and procedural matters in terms of environmental impact assessments, the publicity on the site. There have been some questions about the public consultation on this particular application, so I draw your attention particularly to paragraph 3.2, where the planning authority has certainly undergone its statutory legal requirements in terms of overall publicity for this application, with site notices and publications in the local paper. Community infrastructure levy is also noted. The caravans are not chargeable, however, the day rooms will be. There's also a section under the public sector equality duty, and of course that's particularly relevant when the council, as the planning authority, is recognising those with relevant protected characteristics as set out in 3.7c, which of course relates to gypsies and travellers. And the remaining paragraphs go through that in more detail, as it does in the Human Rights Act under 310 and 311. In terms of conservation, heritage assets, listed building settings, there are no implications at all for this report or in terms of members having to consider those assets. In terms of consultation, Chairman, section 4, we've had a wide range of responses. This is an interesting application because although it lies within, not interesting but unusual, Stratfield-Mortimer Parish Council, 3 parish councils abut the boundary in terms of the location. So Stratfield-Mortimer do not have an objection per se to the application. Sullamstead with Ufton Nervet certainly do, and I'll refer you to the update sheet in a minute. Burfield Parish Council have not objected specifically, but they are concerned about issues such as the DEPZ and the site lying in an isolated location. The Highways Authority, however, have no objections to this application, nor do Archaeology. Environmental Delivery do not have any objections. Basingstoke and Dean, being the adjacent public planning authority, have none. I'd specifically draw your attention to emergency planning. This site does lie within the DEPZ for AWE Burfield. So policy CS8 applies, but having confirmed this once again with our emergency planning officer today, she has raised no objections to this application. In terms of public representations, we have received 13 contributions, one of which is neutral, the other are which are objections, and they are summarised in paragraph 4.3. In terms of planning policy, that's set out in the report, and the appraisal first sets out the principle of development, whether in fact an approval is justified in terms of extant policy, highway matters, landscape and visual, emergency planning, sustainable construction, drainage and representations. So in terms of the West Berkshire Development Plan, the relevant policies, and I won't go through them in any detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And my policy colleague Cheryl is also here as well. It is principally policy CS7 in the core strategy, and officers have gone through that, the criteria in that policy, and have concluded that not wholly, but largely, all the tests in that policy are met by this site. And then there is a more detailed policy in the HSA DPD, which relates to policy TS3, which is the detailed planning considerations for traveller sites. Again, the same iteration is gone through in the report. And again, I won't go through any detail, otherwise it would be a very lengthy presentation, Chairman. And we are satisfied that this recommendation of approval meets those necessary policy tests. Just so that you're aware, if and when, and that is an if and when, the local plan review is adopted, policy DM20 is the draft local plan relating to gypsy sites. And I think it's important because we can give a degree of weight to that, although not a great deal of weight. I'll just read this out because it's important. Existing authorised sites for gypsy traveller and travelling show people will be safeguarded. And of course, this is an existing site, unless acceptable replacement accommodation can be provided. This is to ensure there remains a good supply of pitches and plots in the district. In terms of the national planning policy, the NPPF has a specific annex, PPTS, relating to planning policy for traveller sites, published in 2015. Again, it won't go through any in detail on that, but officers are satisfied that this application meets those policy criteria, apart from one point, in fact, that it is isolated in the countryside. The PPTS seeks ideally sites which are adjacent or in existing communities, so that there can be a degree of, I was going to say, coalition with the local community. In terms of local need and supply, that's all set out in the report. My colleague Cheryl Willett to my left will be able to assist on that because she is, well, without embarrassing her, the council expert on those matters, certainly more of an expert than me. But the message I want to get across to committee tonight is that the council is required to deliver a 5-year housing land supply for gypsies and traveller policy sites. And if this application is refused tonight, that would certainly seriously impact our 5-year, I say housing land supply, it's a land supply for these particular sites. And it would be a serious district problem if the application was refused in terms of that overall need. So that's something for the members to bear in mind when they're considering this application. In terms of the highway matters, this plan perhaps shows it in more detail how the existing highway will link in to the, I don't think my cursor's coming up now, sorry, into the existing Padworth Road. Officers are satisfied that with the traffic generation created by the development on this site, there will be no harm to the public safety, and in fact there will be an improvement. And I was going to say finally, but it's not finally, landscape and visual impact. I'll quickly go through the slides at the end of photographs of the site, but those who attended the site visit will know that the site is extremely well screened by mature vegetation around the site. And at the moment, it is rather unsightly with the security fencing around it. We would suggest as officers that although building is being introduced onto the site, and I say buildings, I mean the day rooms and the caravans, with the new fencing, the wire mesh fencing, there would at least be a degree of intervisibility and not necessarily an improvement, but we're satisfied there won't be harm to overall landscape quality. In terms of the emergency planning and AWE, I've mentioned that already, happy to answer any questions on that, but our emergency planning officer is certainly satisfied that the increase in population, but of course there's only an increase since it's vacant, has been covered off in our emergency plan. And in drainage terms, we do have, I think, another site plan, I hope, showing where the drainage will be. I'll just flick back to that. The blue line to the east of the application site, which moves out of the application site, is now an amended scheme which has been agreed with the adjacent landowners. And in fact, it's the same landowner who owns the site, Englefield Estate. The drainage officer, I'll come to that in the update sheet, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Parish council representations are noted there in the report as well. So before I come to the full recommendation, Chairman, I'll draw your attention, please, to the update sheet. Ufton Nervit PC are objecting to the application. In fact, they've sent in there are no new issues raised, but they've sent in an additional objection. I'll quickly go through those. They're very concerned that no specific public consultation has been undertaken on the application. That is pre-application, not post-application, as I understand it. What future monitoring will take place on the site in the future? Concerned about future flooding, lack of a footway along Padworth Road, and how will future occupancy numbers be controlled? And those issues are reiterated once again in a letter which we received, or an email which we received this afternoon. If I can draw your attention to the additional update report which has been circulated, I will do so now, and that's self-explanatory. The council tree officer is recommending conditional permission. The environmental health officer has said that, or has noted that the site has been effectively decontaminated, but there still remains the possibility of high methane gas levels in the day rooms once constructed, and therefore an appropriate condition should be applied to ensure that the implementation on site is correct. Our drainage officer, and this is an important matter for the committee to take into account, the amended scheme is a betterment over that as previously submitted. However, there remains detailed concerns over the SUD's details. However, should the officers be reminded to recommend approval, a condition is supplied. I should stress, just for clarity, that he is not recommending approval at this junction, but officers consider that in the light of the betterment over the existing situation and the significant need for this gypsy site, then officers are effectively overruling the drainage officer's technical comments. However, should permission be granted, a precondition on SUDs will be applied. The updated recommendation contains additional conditions, Mr. Chairman. They relate to landscaping, unforeseen contamination, gas protection, and the SUDs condition, which you'll see on the last page of the update sheet. So just before I arrive at the conclusion, Chairman, for those who aren't familiar with the site, I'll just quickly go through the photographs of the site because it is an enclosed site. So if those who haven't been on the site visit haven't seen it, obviously, unless you see the aerial photographs, this is how the site appears at the moment. It's very derelict, unattractive. There's not a great deal to say, really. It's basically derelict and unattractive. This is the visibility looking towards the west as existing. This is the access looking forward to the east. And this is the existing site access to be improved should planning permission be granted. Therefore, finally, Chairman, officers are recommending a strong recommendation of approval to this application, given it is an extant site for gypsies. It will form the effective reuse of a currently unattractive site. It will make a significant contribution to the supply of gypsy and traveller sites to meet the locally identified needs. And thirdly, we consider it as well conceived in technical terms, and the applicant has done a very thorough job on preparing the appropriate plans for this application. And fourthly, last but not least, it has no material ecological implications if the development proceeds. And therefore, we are recommending a grant of planning permission, Chairman, with the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. And could I ask members to hold on to any questions they have for officers until after we've had the parish council's objectors and applicant have spoken to us.
Can I just make one point, Chairman, if you may? I know Cheryl wanted to say an adjunct to the officer presentation. Would that be acceptable?
Yes, please.
Policy. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. The committee report sets out the policy position and advises on the principle of development, but I wanted to highlight what national and local planning policies say about gypsy and traveller sites in terms of the need and supply. So the NPPF requires local planning authorities to assess the needs of different groups in the community, including travellers, and that a 5-year supply of deliverable sites for travellers shall be maintained in line with the planning policy for traveller sites. It's the PPTS. Note that this is separate from providing a housing 5-year supply. So the PPTS is a material consideration in planning decisions, and the criteria and assessment against them were set out in the committee report. We do have an up-to-date assessment of traveller needs set out in our gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment, the GTAA. This was last undertaken in 2021. The GTAA surveyed sites advising of supply and need, and for Four Houses Corner, it counts 16 pitches in the supply, as that was what was available on site at the time of the survey. This is separate from the lawful use that benefits from planning permission. So the table in your committee report at 6.43 on page 37 is an adaptation of the original table of pitch need of what we need to plan for. It also takes into account the recent permissions and the additional pitch proposed at Four Houses Corner. And you'll see there are 2 sets of figures. So the PPTS figure is what the government require us to provide based on the definition of travellers as set out in the PPTS Annex A, and it is what our 5-year supply is based on. The table highlights that we can demonstrate a 5-year supply of sites, and we've been supported by that in 2 recent appeal decisions, Ermine Street Lambourne and Lawrence's Lane Thatcham. So the cultural need looks at all traveller need, including those who do not meet the definition, i.e. they identify as a traveller but are not travelling. And a recent Court of Appeal case, Lisa Smith, concluded that this definition of traveller was discriminatory, and this holds great weight in decision-making and plan-making. So we are planning to meet our overall cultural need. Therefore, even without Four Houses Corner, we are still short in the 5-year supply period by 3 pitches. So I wanted to highlight that Four Houses Corner makes a significant contribution in the district supply of traveller sites, and it is an important consideration in your debate. If the site does not get redeveloped and reopened, this creates a large hole in our supply, and importantly means we would not be able to demonstrate a 5-year supply when measured against the PPTS. This then carries the risk of approving permission for less suitable sites where the need for pitches outweighs other factors such as landscape impact. It also impacts on our work with the local plan, as we could go into our examination hearing sessions without a 5-year supply. So I just wanted to make you aware of the need to maintain supply and how important the delivery of Four Houses Corner is to this. And I hope this explains our position. So thank you, members. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Can we move on then to the parish? Sorry. Councillor Taylor. Well, could I ask you to hang on till after we've heard from the parish councils, the objectors and the applicant, because some of the questions might well be answered, particularly from the applicant. Okay, thank you. Move on then to the representative for Strathfield Waterbury, Parish Council, Councillor Graham Bridgman. Is he in the? It's online. Good evening, Graham.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members.
Would you like a warning when you get towards the end of your 5 minutes?
Well, I've got a stopwatch on this, but give me 30 seconds if I'm still going.
Okay, fine.
Thank you, Chairman. The SNPC Planning Committee was, of course, aware of public feeling about PC Harper's tragic death, but very much along the lines of the statement by Mr. Till, looked at this application purely on planning grounds. And our debate very much referenced the existing permission and the need to avoid what I would term guerrilla planning applications, as have happened elsewhere and have been the subject of appeal decisions. All of this doesn't mean that we don't have concerns and questions. And we now raise 3 issues: public engagement, occupancy, and SUDs. On the engagement front, the report refers to 3 Stratfield-Mortimer Neighbourhood Development Plan policies, but unfortunately it gets 1 policy reference correct, 2 wrong, and ignores 2 fundamental policies entirely. And I'll come to the second one under SUDS. The first one is NDP policy GD1, and that reads, in order to provide high quality developments in the parish, all developments of any sort shall comply with the following parameters, including any new development within the settlement boundary will be encouraged to prepare a site design brief, including community involvement, which reflects the policies set out in this plan. This brief would then be included in any planning submission after consultation via the parish council. Now, the applications design and access statement, which was, I remind you, dated last September, reads at 2.2, following consultation with the planners, the scheme is to be presented to local residents at a public consultation meeting on the date of which is yet to be confirmed. That's how it's written. Their views are to be taken into account in the development of the design. And at 2.7, it is intended to undertake a residents' consultation to assist with the design development of the scheme. Now, there has been no residents' consultation, nor any consultation with the parish council. So Mr. Butler referred to statutory publication of the site notice, but the lack of engagement, firstly required by an NDP planning policy, and secondly promised in the design and access statement, and also the fact that this site, as has been said, is remote, and thus the orange sign was remote, very distant from the settlement of Mortimer, have, we think, contributed to very few Mortimer residents being aware, and possibly thus fewer public responses that might have been the case. On occupancy, much has been made of the reduction in the pitch number from an extant 18 to 17. Now, I believe that the site visit established that each pitch could accommodate 2 full-sized residential caravans. And I would say that the original 1981 plans for that permission showed a total of 12 caravans and 9 smaller touring caravans without any double pitches. So my question is, what is the site occupancy in terms of people? Emergency planning, in considering the site's siting within the DEPZ, said they didn't object as there was a reduction in the number of pitches. But our question is, what about the number of residents? Where is that control? And finally, on SUDS, neither the report nor the SUDS condition in the update pack refer to NDP policy GD3, which reads, developers shall adopt a worst case scenario to manage surface water runoff. Rain falling on saturated ground or dry compacted ground, the 100% runoff, a peak intensity rainfall over 30-minute period of 20 millimetres within the critical event duration, and the higher of either of the rainfall assumptions in the standard calculations, or the maximum rainfall recorded in the closest approved weather station to Stratford-Mortimer over the last 20 years, with an allowance of plus 30% for climate change. Now, I don't say that I entirely understand the niceties of all of that, but my fundamental question to officers is, does the SUDS condition comply with planning policy, NDP policy, GD3? I don't know the answer. I invite you to ask officers. Finally, I would simply say, this is a controversial site, and I would ask members outside the planning committee, as members of the council, to very carefully look at the conditions on which those tenancies are given, and the question of things like CCTV and so forth. That is not a planning issue here, but I just ask members as members to look at those issues when that comes forth. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I think your timing was bang on. Would you remain while members may ask?
Of course.
Are there any questions for Councillor Bridgman, please? No. Thank you very much. You've got off very lightly, Graham.
Thank you, Chairman.
Could we move on then to the parish council representative for Afton Nerva and Solomsted, please? Would you like to come to the dais and turn the microphone on? And could I ask you to remain there at the end of your piece in case members wish to ask you any questions? You have 5 minutes. Would you like any help with timing?
I have a stopwatch, but yes, please.
Okay. So do you want us to give 1 minute to go, or?
That would be fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Margaret Baxter and I'm Chair of Sulhamstead Parish Council. However, I'm speaking today on behalf of Sulhamstead and Ufton Nervet Parish Councils. I'd like to begin by highlighting that locally, this is a controversial and emotive application, as has already been acknowledged, due to the history of the site and particularly the tragic death of PC Andrew Harper in 2019. It's fair to say that his death had a very profound effect on the community. It is understood that this is not a planning consideration, but we wanted to raise it on behalf of the community. Turning to planning matters, the parish councils consider that due process has not been followed with regard to this planning application. Page 4 of the design and access statement clearly says there will be pre-application consultations, 1 with the local community and 2 with residents. Neither of these have taken place. And it is the opinion of the parish councils that this application should not be heard by the committee until such consultations have taken place. There appears to be some confusion over the number of people, and our colleague from Mortimer has already raised it, that will be resident on the site and how that will be impacted by the Aldermaston DEPZ. The Joint Emergency Planning comment says, having reviewed the information and taking into account the facts that the site previously had permissions in place for a greater number of pitches and the site is accounted for in the AWE site emergency plan, we do not object. However, the application is actually for an increased number than those that were on the site before it was cleared. There were 18 pitches with an assumed occupancy of 4 people per van, which is 72 people. Now there are 17 double pitches, which would equate to 136 people, which is 17 by 2 pitches, 34 pitches with an assumed occupancy of 4, which is 136. Some of them are bigger and could possibly take more. There needs to be absolute clarity regarding the maximum numbers that will be allowed on the site safely, and there should be a further review of that in relation to the Aldermaston DEPZ. This is a busy road and safe access to and from the site is critical. The entrance to the site is close to a tight bend on the road, with traffic on that road travelling at least 60 miles an hour. Similar to the DEPZ, it's considered that the response from highways is based upon incorrect information. As it says, as the proposal is to replace the existing 18 pitches with 17, I would not be expecting any increase in traffic generation, but clearly there will be a lot more traffic, with the potential for at least 34 cars as opposed to 18. Reading Road at the junction with Island Farm Road is a black spot for flooding. Highways have tried to fix this in the past, but without success. It is understood that engineers have been engaged, but their report on page 10 states there are no historical incidents of flooding within the proximity of the site, which is incorrect. The application mentions permeable material, but there is still concern that the current flooding options could be exacerbated. At the recent site visit with parish council, the parish councils had questions that we were asked to defer to this evening, and they are: 1, there appears to be no pedestrian access to the site. This is a dangerous road. Will access be by vehicle only? 2, how will the site be managed and monitored going forward from a security perspective? What is the cost of the security provision, which we are given to understand is considerable? What preparations are in place for refuse collection and sewage disposal? 4, what is the extent of the external lighting and what measures will be in place to avoid light pollution? In conclusion, it's the view of the parish councils that this application has been rushed through without any of the required consultations and, crucially, without any information with regard to the final costings for the site. It is considered that the ambiguity regarding the number of residents and cars on the site has led to incorrect responses from DEPZ and highways. We therefore respectfully request that any decision on this application be deferred until due process has been followed and adequate responses to the issues raised have been obtained.
I was about to say you have just less than 1 minute left.
Look at that. Thank you.
Are there any questions, please, for Councillor Cottam?
Thank you. About the number of people and the number of sites, what is your major concern about an increase in numbers? For example, I mean, we have visitors at home. We have a place, for a drive to park on if they have children coming to visit and things like this. So what is your major concern? Because it may flux and go. I mean, they are travellers after all.
But I think it has been acknowledged that they're travellers that don't travel, and an increase from 70 something to 136 is quite considerable. And our question is that impacted by the Aldermaston DEPZ? Because this has been said, this is about people, not the number of pitches, and the number of people potentially that could be resident on the site is significantly more than was before. So that is our concern.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Mays.
Thank you, Chairman. My concern has been really about the flooding situation that you mentioned. Do you believe that that flooding was due to a natural rainfall or runoff or pollution from the previous occupancy of the site?
It's fair to say I'm not an expert in these things, but I think it's probably a natural, it's the state of the road, and it could be a combination of them all. But the end result is it floods regularly and to quite a considerable level. And as I mentioned in my presentation, that's tried to be addressed on a number of occasions and without success. So why that is, I don't know, but it hasn't been resolved. And it is an area that floods very regularly. I suspect it's heavy rainfall, but I'm not an expert on that. But the end result is it does flood quite considerably.
Fine, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, please? Councillor Taylor.
Yes, you made some comments regarding the consultation with the local community, and I've seen, I also picked up a couple of days ago these statements in the design and access statement. Did you make any attempts at all as a parish council to actually get that public consultation going at all? Were you chasing up anybody?
We have done. It's fair to say as well, though, actually, we just assumed that due process would happen. And one of the reasons our objection was quite late was that we were waiting to see when the public consultations were arranged. And I suppose one could argue that it's not for us to chase the district council, it's for the district council to follow due process. So we expected that to happen. And we expected it particularly in this case because, as I've said and others have acknowledged, this is a very emotive case. And so consultation with the local community to us is really critical, and it hasn't taken place. And the posting of some notices is not sufficient.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Could we now go over to Deborah Adland via Zoom, who is an objector? Sorry, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
You can hear me now? Okay. Good evening. I'm obviously mum to PC Andrew Harper, whose death was directly connected to this site. So it makes it an exceptional and a significant issue connected to the site. It's not just an event that happened. I have to speak up. I can't take this laying down for Andrew, his memory, and particularly the colleagues of Andrew. The policing side of things is really important. Basically, they remain haunted by the events of what they saw that night, what was actually going on. They were there. They have to live with what they've seen. I have to try and protect his memory, and I feel like at the moment it's like, you know, this is done, dusted, we can all move on, which we will never be able to move on. That connection to that site will exist always for us and for the police community. There are several sites in the area already, and this is going to be reopened with a larger amount of people living there. And I'd like to know basically who will be living there. Is it going to be the same families? Is it going to be former residents? And how will that be managed? The site was supposed to be previously only women and children. Well, there were males living there. You know, is this going to be a mixed site? How is it going to be managed? Who's supposed to be living there and who actually lives there? Speaking of the landscape outside, I'm reliably informed that there is a history of a lot of damage to the surrounding forestry outside from stolen, burnt out cars and other items that have made it impassable to other people living there trying to actually go by. And I'm sure this wasn't just women and children that did that. So this is something of an issue for me that I think who is going to live there, should it be approved, is actually quite vital to know. What we've seen from the people that were resident there at the time is nothing but appalling, quite honestly. We've had no sense of empathy from their community whatsoever in 4 years. The only incidences of anything from that side of the community is parties that lasted for days, over weekends, of when we had the sentences and the verdicts. I heard of parties near to where my parents live, even parties that had never been held before, that went on for days. And we had pieces in newspapers, national press saying, and this is from a sister, so a blood relative, saying, our boys are the heroes. So the community, I'm not, and I will emphasise, I am not a racist person, but the community have had no reactions of any sort of positivity towards us since this absolutely terrible thing happened to us in our lives. You know, before too long, in a few short years, the people that are actually responsible are going to be back out on the streets. Now, the people that have to police them are a concern to me. There's been concerns with the police in that site for quite a long time in the past. I'm sure you're aware of that. The police have been there regularly. They've had their tyres slashed, their windows broken, and they've had to turn up in pairs for their own safety. Now that can't be right. And what worries me now is I know in recent times there's been events where the police have had to attend and they're ridiculing those police officers because of the death of Andrew. We have to live knowing these things happen as part of our life now. And my concern is for the mental health of the amount of officers that will still have to go up there. And some of those people were actually there and present and friends of Andrew's and saw the absolute devastation that his body endured. Now, my worry is just, you know, if this reopens in the same site, it's brushing it aside. I know everybody knows, they think they know how bad this event was.
Up for a second. You have 1 minute remaining. 1 minute.
Okay. I just want to basically say, you know, anybody that thinks they know how bad it was, think again. It was an awful lot worse than you actually realise. I know every detail that I could possibly know, and I worry for others, police officers, mental health, and whether they're likely to have a suicide on their hands because of the reopening of this site. I just want to pay my tribute to my son, but also to the officers who continue to do a good job to keep us safe. I want them to keep themselves safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I ask if any members have any questions, I'd like to express both my own and the committee's sympathies and condolences for the loss of your son. And I think we'd all join in with respect to the concerns you have for his fellow police officers. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't attend, but I've got COVID now, so I'm struggling to talk even.
Oh, no, but I hope you recover soon.
Thank you.
Are there any questions, please? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could we move on now to the applicant and Bill Bagnall, who is an officer of this council? Would you like to come to the dais, please? And again, you have 5 minutes. Would you like a warning? 1 minute warning? Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Chair and members. As said, my name is Bill Bagnall. I'm the Council's project officer overseeing the scheme and its potential delivery should it achieve a consent. In seeking approval of this application, I am myself aware of the site's past history and in particular the dreadful events of August 2019. That said, my role as the Council's project officer is to see a scheme come forward to planning committee that meets best practice. The proposals are a reasonable balance between cost and need, and in respect of individuals representing a protected minority who have a legal right to return to a site that has an established travel use that goes back more than 40 years. In 2016, the site was identified as being run down, untidy and no longer fit for purpose. The built structures on site dated from 1982, had undergone hard use and were beyond economic refurbishment. Proposals reflect input from the emergency services, and where the radial design dating back to 2017 achieves clear lines of sight from the highway's access for emergency services and efficient use of space to deliver the number of plots required within appropriate day room accommodation, parking, and mobile home capacity. The site is within the AWE detailed emergency planning zone, and the provision of block-built day room accommodation not only meets best practice for traveller sites, but also satisfies the UK Health Security Agency requirement for built structures to provide 48-hour refuge for all residents and any visitors. The access and turnaround circle were built to highway standard to ensure robustness, and where the 1.8 metre wide pavement will have flush curbs to allow ease of vehicle turning and entry and exit onto and out of each pitch. The road network will not, however, have street lighting as appropriate to the site's rural location, and where external lighting within the site will be limited to the access bell mouth and the bin store recycling area. The site will generally feel green, providing areas of grass up to 50% of the whole area, which will be maintained as such. This is a significant improvement on the previous site, and where green spaces cannot subsequently be overlaid with unauthorized hard surfaces. I am aware anecdotally of previous flooding in the southeast corner and at the northeast corner near the highway, which is addressed by formal drainage proposals which did not exist before, and improved flood attenuation through increased areas of grass, and critically by raising site levels by up to 600 millimetres, and where the hardcore material below finishes surfaces and the grass will act as a first point of capture for water. Drainage will be designed with appropriate interceptors to capture non-based water liquids accidentally getting into the drainage system. Occupation numbers are limited by the physical space provided within proposals and the provision of only one services utilities hookup, water, electricity, foul drainage, to each pitch. Pitch lease agreements also include terms as to who is permitted to use the pitches. Additionally, once refurbishment has taken place, the council intends for the site to be formally managed. I can't go into details of individual leases because that wouldn't be appropriate. However, together then, there will be a number of measures to help control numbers of those on site, as said, itself not a planning matter, while still allowing reasonable space for residents returning and periodic visits by friends and family. In conclusion, Chair and members, delivery of this new site, set out in the manner illustrated within proposals, provides an opportunity for a fresh start and maximise the ability to have the site reoccupied in a tidy, safe and thoughtful manner, both to the advantage of the wider community as well as residents returning to Four Houses Corner. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks, Mr. Bagnall.
Sorry, Bill, 'cause I forgot to ask you to remember.
Bill, just to sort of clarify the question about the number of residents on site. So can you clarify then, what is the maximum number of people who would be permanently resident on the site or could be permanently resident on the site based on these plans?
I can't give you the exact number. I think outside of this meeting, I think if it's appropriate, talk about numbers, but obviously the numbers are related to individual lease agreements, which are related to the former residents who are in temporary accommodation, who have individual lease agreements under the Mobile Homes Act. And so we can give you a reasonable number, but I don't believe I'm able to talk about it in this meeting, and nor do I have the information right now. I think it's fair to say the measures put in place via lease agreements this time round provide better protections to what might have happened in the past.
I absolutely don't expect you to go into individual lease agreements. I'm surprised, though, to you say that the number of people isn't a material consideration, which you did earlier on. Surely it's material to highways, for traffic and emergency planning. Is this one for Mr. Butler later on, do you think?
Yeah, it is.
Well, I mean, the designs allow for the park up of 2 caravans. And as I said, only one of which can actually be hooked up to the services. And the designs are pretty standard for static traveller sites. There's nothing extra over in the provision.
So can I just come in if members don't mind? As you heard, there's great concern that about the number of, I think, the number of caravans and therefore the number of people who might be on the site. But it sounds to me with the combination of the number of hookups for things like power and water and the lease agreements, there will actually be a control on what, shall I say, the numbers of families. Is that the right way of putting it? So although you can't give the number of people, the number of families is really controlled.
The lease agreements are specific to adults and permanent dependents on site. I think that's probably as much as I can say. If we deliver the scheme and it's occupied, the lease agreements and the management of the site, if those agreements are substantially broken, then there are grounds to review what's going on. I think that's as much as I could say.
Thank you. Councillor Cotton.
Thank you. Just one of the expressions of concern from the parish was about flooding. I was actually looking at a neighbour's drive who's used like a semi-permeable polymer approach to hard standing. Is that the type of thing we're going to be looking at?
The key thing is to raise the actual design of the scheme with the hard standings. Generally, it will be raised, and then below that to have a sub base of the equivalent of crushed hardcore that acts in effect. I'm not an expert. A giant sump to capture the water there that exists now, and previously there was no way for extreme levels to be discharged off the site, and we now have that capacity. There had been a plan to put it into a very deep ditch near the highway. As the case officers pointed out, that was picked up by highways. And so now we've got permission from the landowner to discharge extreme event stormwater off the site into a very deep field ditch that is connected to the same field ditch by the highway. But of course, the landfalls fall away from the highway and the actual drainage run is several hundred metres away from the highway.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Mays.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I advised you that I hadn't received the details of the raised land that you proposed for the drainage area under the site. And I still haven't got that information, which I think I need to make an assessment of the actual water retaining capacity of that area. You've just talked about the actual surface area on which the caravans are going to be placed. Is that not a concrete slab under each caravan?
It's a mixture of the concrete pitches the caravans with a threshold of tarmac leading to the turning circle.
So it's an impermeable area.
Effectively, yes.
And the land, the soil or depth of soil underneath it, the 600 millimetres you were talking about, that is still a, let's call it a permeable material?
It is fully permeable, yes. It is designed to act not only as a sump for stormwater, but actually in the event that any materials find its way below the surface, if one day the site is no longer used to travel site and it was to be the land be remediated, that 600 mil sump capture could also be removed if it was contaminated. I think it's fair to say if the condition is imposed, there'll be a lot more detail coming out, which hopefully will satisfy your concerns.
It's going to need a lot to satisfy me on that particular point, I'm afraid. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mays, I think it's worthwhile pointing out that if we do approve this evening, there will be a SUDS condition.
Yes, I realise that.
So this is not cut and dried.
No,
it has to satisfy the officer. And for the benefit of the members of the public, SUDS stands for Sustainable Urban Drainage System. So, which I think is, we've had a few acronyms this evening. I think we need to explain, but that was one of them. Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Bagnall? Councillor Taylor.
Yes, Chair, I'm going to go back to the question I was going to answer earlier, so it may not be specifically for the cover. Speak. Well, when I look going back to the consultation, one thing that seems to be missing there is I don't see any feedback from the Gypsy and Traveller community itself on this application. Has there been any consultation in relation to this application with that community?
Again, I can't go into detail, but housing are in regular dialogue with the residents who intend to return. Those residents have seen the scheme. In fact, they saw the scheme many years ago. It hasn't really changed substantially in terms of design. And should we achieve a consent today, that is the scheme they would expect to see built out. And I think they're generally happy with that.
Any other questions? Councillor Pemberton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You mentioned that emergency services had some input into the design of the site and obviously shared their thoughts. Can you just talk us through that in a bit of detail in terms of?
I can do. It goes back a long way and is tied to the confusion over the consultation, which I'll apologise for. In December 2018, which I realise is a long time ago now, and with the wisdom of hindsight, it would have been good perhaps to reconvene the meeting that took place in December 2018, whereby our senior officers, Thames Valley Police and then ward members and parish councillors met to discuss proposals. And at that meeting, ward members and parish councillors, I accept the time, were advised that the design proposals, the radial design, had been then approved by Thames Valley Police. And one of the issues picked up at the time was that emergency vehicles coming on site should never run the risk of being blocked in. And hence you have lines of sight, you come in and you can see the whole site. The previous site had a number of dead ends. And, without, going into detail or making assumptions at how people might behave in the future, you can have vehicles being blocked off. So in that respect, the radial design does reflect past input, but I concede it's a long time ago now.
Thanks.
Councillor Poole.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm aware that the site has obviously been present for some time. It was there when I moved into the village, and it's probably going to be there for a great many years yet. What state that is in, I don't know. One of the things that I am aware of is that the site was originally connected to Burfield Common Village through a path. Now, over time, that path, which was at the side of the road, it was at the verge, has been degraded through natural wear and tear and has been partially excavated in order to be able to provide a drainage ditch for surface runoff. Now, in your proposed redevelopment of the site, it's the proposed redevelopment of the area that the caravans are standing. What developments are being proposed, if any, in order to reconnect that site to the village so that it is walkable and it's safe for people to do so without walking on the main road?
Not related to the planning application, but one of the requirements the council has as the tenant of the Englefield estate is that generally we need to tidy up the area around the footpath. And as mentioned earlier on, there is still debris around there. And even though it's actually outside of the development site, it falls within the council's lease area responsibility. So there'll be a general tidy up. And that's one of the things that I'll have to manage as part of the wider project. So I hope through that connectivity and general sort of pleasant place to walk through will be reinstated.
Thank you.
Councillor McKinnon.
So I come back for another bite of the cherry, Mr. Bagnall. Just your point about your answer to Councillor Pemberton's point about the emergency services access. I think I'm right in saying that there is still the potential here to be blocked in, isn't there? Because you've only got one single entry point to the site. It comes to the roundabout. But if someone were to block the inroads, that's also blocking the outroad. Is that right?
That is correct. the single point of entry is a risk. It's an improvement on what was there before, and not, you know, I'm not an expert, and I would not want to try and prescribe what emergency services do. But in an ideal world, the entry, if in the event something happens, the entrance needs to be protected, and then when vehicles go into the site, their route out again is protected.
Councillor Poole.
So I'm a bit like Ross, I'm back for another bite.
Okay.
You mentioned about lighting. And obviously, with the site being outside, and it's very, very rural, it's in the middle of an estate, an Englefield estate, natural woodland area. Obviously, you can't have any street lamps. So then what provisions are there in order to make the entry and exit of that site safe, bearing in mind most lights within that area turn off at midnight?
There will be, as I said in my presentation, as you point out, that there is and cannot be any street lighting in the sense that it's not going to be an adopted highway. There will be lighting to the site entrance, and there's proposed lighting for the bin store recycling area, just to make it practical for people in the dark hours of the winter. We haven't set any timer on what those lights, how they may come on and off in the dark hours, but the site entrance will be protected, as it were, or the lines of sight improved by lighting, and but the rest of the site will be dark beyond the people living there domestically.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Chairman, thank
you. Could I call on Councillor Nick Carter to speak as local member? And Nick, you have 5 minutes. Would you like a time of warning, say 1 minute before you? Yeah. Thank you.
Very much.
Oh, it's press and let go. Try again. Try again with the microphone on, as we say on Kennet Radio. I'm one of the ward members and I'm not on the committee, which is why I'm speaking, just for the public's benefit. I make my recommendations based on information provided to me by officers together with my own research, and I've tried to take account of public feedback on the matter. I've also tried to listen to what I've heard tonight. I'm very much aware of the strong objections to restoring the site to use, with objectors suggesting that the residents should be located somewhere well away from the current site. These concerns obviously stem from the perceived association of the site with the killing of PC Andrew Harper in 2019. When I wrote this, I said that these concerns include those outlined by PC Harper's mother, who obviously we heard from just a little earlier. I can only begin to imagine what she and PC Harper's wife and family have gone through. I really can't put myself in their shoes. I will try to just address some of those sentiments, though. I understand that those convicted of the manslaughter did not live at the site. The crime was committed nearby, very nearby in Camp Road. There's no suggestion that any resident of that site had a role in the crime. I note also that Pauline Anderson, chair of the Traveller Movement, condoned the killing and stated there's so much shock and horror that this should happen, and to someone in the line of duty, the alleged lack of remorse is unforgivable. Jeanette McCormack of the National Police Chiefs Council, the lead for Gypsies, Roma and Travellers, said separately, there seems to be a deep-seated and accepted prejudice that demonises people from that community. You wouldn't call any other ethnicity inherently criminal. There is no evidence to suggest that we have disproportionately high crime rates around traveller sites. So moving on to the suggestion for an alternative site, my understanding is that the government guidelines for Gypsy Traveller Romany sites is to integrate them more closely with the community than the current site, which would suggest looking at somewhere closer to Burfield or Mortimer. I notice Ufton, Silhampstead and Burfield, I think, have suggested that as well. This guidance does support that suggestion, and in line with the family's requests as well. But I understand too that the former residents have a legal right to return to that site, and that any attempt to seek another site in Mortimer or Burfield will ultimately fail. So I conclude that for that reason only, this site is appropriate, and it would be unreasonable, non-productive to look at for another one. Just on Stratfield Mortimer's comments that I they seem to have added some since their written feedback from earlier. They mention, and others mention, there's no direct link from the site for pedestrians to nearby public footpaths. My observation there is that the residents of the site have been consulted on this proposal, and they have not suggested they need it. I mean, that's a slightly blunt view, but that's my understanding. And again, perhaps that view from Mortimer and Burfield and Ufton is to think that it would be better to move the site nearer to Burfield or Mortimer, but per my earlier comment, I don't see we can. Regarding the query about future recontamination, I understand that would be addressed with the lease agreement with the tenant. The point about public consultation, I wrote this earlier, so I haven't completely picked up on all the thoughts there. My simple, slightly blunt view of this is that having not been, when I wasn't on district, public consultation meant parish consult on things that they need to consult on and they get the feedback. Stratfield Mortimer sat on its hands on this one. So I think there may be a misunderstanding in the application, but to my mind, district has done what it normally does, and actually personally as a board member and my colleague Vicky have both put this out there. We've both got feedback. Sorry, I'm going to be out of time here. So I think you have 1 minute. Oh, okay, great. I'll probably be fine. Costs were eye-watering. I discovered that there was a £3.5 million budget, which was signed off pre the election. Before, I understand the costs were recalculated in mid-2022 to give a far more realistic estimate. I've got a breakdown of that. I think for the public's point of view, we won't know the real cost till we go to tender. But main point is this design is in line with other such designs in the other parts of the country. And also finally on the, so I think there's no point keep quibbling about the cost because it's a standard design for this sort of site, from my understanding. On the DAPZ, and also the comments about the number of people, the issue is, can those people decamp into the building adjacent to the caravan if it kicks off at AWE? That's my understanding, and I'm assuming we've covered that and it is covered. So my conclusion is that on the basis that the existing residents primarily have a legal right to return, and they've approved the design and the design is in line with national, subject to the issue of the women and children, which Deborah mentioned earlier, which is a new one to me, I support the application.
Thank you. Could you remain there to answer any questions that members may have?
Yeah, fine, yeah.
Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Carter. I'd like to probe you on your comments on consultation, please. Former Councillor Bridgman, when he spoke earlier on, said that the Stratfield Mortimer NDP policy required a consultation to be carried out. Now, I think you said that Stratfield Mortimer sat on their hands. Well, if they sat on their hands, that doesn't negate the need for that consultation to take place, does it not?
No, I agree. That was that he said tonight. I didn't know if that had been said before that comment. My understanding till tonight was that the point about the consultation was the parishes, as you'll be aware, were all told about this was coming. And the normal thing with that is, okay, parishes, it's your opportunity to consult your public. Stratfield Mortimer didn't. So they're now saying, and perhaps they did say originally, that actually that's fine because district haven't complied with the NDP. I suppose I'm saying it's a bit late to be hearing that. If that was told earlier, fine, but it's new to me tonight that there's a sort of disconnect between us and them, as it were.
Okay.
But my context for public consultation was normally, I mean, I'm being a bit blunt about it just to try and get the point across. Normally, parish does the consultation if they think they should. And in this case, they didn't. To be honest, me and Vicky did it. Now, the NDP is a separate issue. That's the point.
Councillor McKinnon.
One more, thanks, Chairman, and thanks, Councillor Carter. Maybe I'm not sure I fully understood your answer there, but we'll maybe tease it out in the debate. But on the residents' consultation, in the design and access statement, I'm looking at it right now. And again, Graham Bridgman referred to it. It says it's intended to undertake a residents' consultation to assist with the design development of the scheme. And what I'm hearing tonight is that never happened.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. I mean, you guys, I suggest you make a decision on that based on what you've got in front of you. I'm not trying to dispute that.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Could I just make a comment? I mean, the way I read that, just picking up on the residents' consultation, so I may not, I am asking a question. I understood that to be referring to the resident, that part to be the residents being the travellers that would be residing on the site. Am I misunderstanding that? Because I thought the local community was covered in point 2.2.
Is that a question to me? Yes. Yeah. So my understanding, and this may not, I hope this is answering the question, that the former residents and potential going back in residents have been consulted on the plan and are okay with it, as Bill said earlier.
As was answered.
And on the other point about consultation, there appears to be, as Councillor McKinnon said, a promise of some consultation which didn't happen. Why that promise was made and whether there was a misunderstanding, I don't know. But I'm also saying, using the example of Stratfield Mortimer, they didn't consult the residents on it, but me as an individual did, but I'm in that capacity acting as a district councillor. So I hope that helps.
So are there any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Let me then move into a session where we can ask questions of the officers. I think a lot of issues have been raised, so I guess there's going to be quite a lot of questions. So who would like to go first? Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I need everybody to cast their mind back, and I don't know whether anybody wrote it down, and I'm looking at you, Mr. Butler, I'm afraid, with regards to the first set of questions that came from Councillor Bridgman, and in specific detail to the policies that he was quoting. It would be useful to have your views and answers on those, please.
I'll try and do my best, but I stand to be corrected. I'll just say, so the actual policy states that, first of all, any new development within the settlement boundary will be encouraged to prepare a site design brief. Well, first of all, this site is clearly outside the defined settlement boundary, so that aspect of GD1 is irrelevant. It then goes on to say in the next paragraph, can everyone hear me all right?
Could you reorientate one of the microphones?
It's a bit different. So you should want to show. Yeah. So for any housing development proposals outside the settlement boundary, in addition to satisfying the requirements of WC policy C1, the applicant shall prepare a site design brief, including community involvement. My reading of that, and I stand to be corrected by policy colleagues, I'll come back to this, is that policy C1 relates to housing developments only. And you might say I'm being pedantic, but this actually isn't housing development. Okay, it's development that has people residing in it, but it's not housing per se, because under the Caravan and Sites Legislations Act, caravans are specifically not housing per se within that use class. That's my understanding. So being absolutely pedantic, that policy, in my view, does not apply in any event, if that helps. Others, it's probably something you could debate at a public inquiry, but we're not at a public inquiry today. That's my professional interpretation of that particular policy.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Chairman. Sort of talking to you while you're behind me, Michael, sorry. I'm really struck by the SUDS issue here. And I know that Councillor Mays has brought it up. I've been to quite a lot of these planning committees in the past, and I don't ever remember a SUDS officer's opinion being overruled. Now, you can tell me if that's wrong or not. You know, Mr. Backus, the SUDS officer, has not recommended approval, and yet somebody else, might be you, I don't know, has said, no, we do recommend approval. How often do you do that?
It does happen, and we don't do it lightly, but in this case, hopefully I can persuade you that the process has been correctly followed. I've had quite a long discussion with the SUDS officer yesterday, and it is unfortunate that his final advice on the amended plans was so close to the committee. I won't resile from that point of view. However, having discussed it with him, The way the condition is worded, if permission is granted, it's what's called a precondition, so that no development can commence on the site at all until the SUDS officer is satisfied that the drainage on the site is acceptable. Now, secondly, he specifically makes the point in his consultation response that there is, in fact, in any event, a betterment over the existing situation. So the flooding situation on the highway will be improved in any event. And let's not forget, this is in flood zone 1 anyway, which is the lowest probability of flooding. And it's on a gravel plateau. Gravel, as you'll all know, is one of the best permeable natural geological strata in any event. And there are no immediate built development nearby in any event. So taking that in the round, plus the need for this gypsy site or gypsy and traveller site as well, I have taken the professional view in advising the committee that in this instance, if you like, I don't like to use the word overruling, but it is, overruling the SUDS officer's advice is what I am doing in advising you to still recommend approval. If there was no SUDS condition, I would say that would be entirely inappropriate. We must go through the detail. But there is the SUDS condition, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to make a supplemental on that because I too am not particularly comfortable with the use of the word overruled. I understand why that word's been used. At the same time, it is not the one that I would have chosen to use personally. Members, you're reminded that at all times we make a planning judgment based on what we consider to be the material planning considerations at play and the weight attributed to them. And the national planning legislation and guidance requires us to take a proactive approach towards planning applications in seeking resolution of outstanding matters that are able to be resolved by condition through use of a condition. In this case, officers, I slightly disagree with Mr. Butler, are not overruling the drainage engineer. They are, in fact, taking on board his advice and making a planning judgment to recommend to you that the condition that has been recommended is sufficient to address the requirements for drainage on this site. So it's a matter of a planning judgment taking on board the drainage officer's advice. Thank you, members.
Can I ask another question on that? So thanks for that, Mr. Till, but how can you say you're taking on board his advice when he says we'd prefer the concerns were addressed prior to approval?
The drainage officer is entitled to give advice about how he would prefer concerns to be addressed, and we're entitled to make a planning judgment on the basis of the evidence presented to us and the matters that he's raised in concerns. That planning judgment may differ from what he recommends. That is not, in my view, overruling his recommendation. That is simply making a planning judgment on the basis of what can fulfill his recommendation.
So would I be right in thinking that the drainage officer still has control over this application, but because of that condition, that condition needs to be satisfied that condition is satisfied before approval can be given?
Thank you, Chairman. You're correct in that while the drainage officer has expressed a preference that the evidence that he wants to demonstrate a workable drainage strategy is provided up front, your officers, your planning officers, are of the view that that evidence can be provided perfectly adequately through the condition that he's recommended.
Councillor Mays.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. I think it was Councillor from Mortimer that said that they were using the maximum rainfall at the Mortimer station for climate, plus the climate change allowance in the design of the actual surface water runoff from the site. Now, I think that from memory was about 70 millimeters per hour in the 2007 period. So we're talking about a fair amount of water, 100 millimeters per
Councillor
hour.
Bates, is there a question coming, please?
Yes. I cannot see that the design that we've been shown or talked about actually can accommodate that amount of water.
I mean, that's not really a question to officers at this point. It's something you might want to raise in the debate later.
Yeah, but I think the...
You want me to answer it, Chairman?
Yeah, please do.
As Simon has said, but I'll perhaps expand upon it. If permission is granted tonight, and assuming you agree the SUDS condition, which obviously officers strongly recommend you do, the applicant will then have to seek discharge of that condition, and the SUDS officer will be consulted on it. And if he is not satisfied, and I can't answer technical questions because I'm not a SUDS officer, but I can confirm to you that if he's not satisfied with the information put to him under that discharge of condition application, the applicant will not be able to commence on the site. And that's all I can say. It's a normal process where we are satisfied that that is the case here. That's all I can say.
Okay.
Councillor McKinnon.
Apologies again, Chairman, for a second bite. And this one again is to you, Michael, sort of behind me. I'm just looking at the Stratford Mortimer NDP right now. You can maybe see it on the screen. And the policy GD1 says that for any housing development proposals outside the settlement boundary, in addition to satisfying the requirements of WB policy C1, the applicant shall prepare a site design brief, including community involvement, which reflects the policies in the plan and will include it. I think, sort of throw that on you, but based on that, would you comment that that community involvement hasn't happened?
Well, it's rather difficult for me to comment on that because although I'm part of the council, obviously I'm not the applicant. But what I would stress is that even if what I would call a process point has not been properly administered, and that's a debatable point anyway in this application, what members need to do at this planning committee, and sorry if I'm sounding a bit, I try not to sound pompous at all, but I know sometimes I come across like that. But you need, in my view, in giving you professional advice, is to focus on the planning issues at hand, the land use planning issues, and whether this development is acceptable in relation to extant policy. And I would suggest, I'm not trying to belittle policy, I think it's GD3, it is part of the development plan, but that's specifically a process point rather than a significant land use planning point, if I can put it that way. It's a bit of a fine point. I mean, possibly Mr. Little or Cheryl can help me on that point, but that's the way I interpret it.
Mr. Littlewood, could you provide assistance?
Apologies, Chairman. Like all policies, they are written and we like developers to follow them. Unfortunately, developers do not necessarily follow all the policies that are written. It is disappointing. It is not how planning officers like to see things done, but in itself, it is not a crime. It is just, and it has minimal weight in determining of the planning application. The application has to be determined on the merits presented before you. The NPPF has for years tried to get developers to pre-engage with the communities involved. And it doesn't matter what that development is.
I don't need to tell you, members, how much pre-engagement goes on from anything from an extension to a single dwelling, where they haven't notified the next door neighbours, but they're putting in an application until the orange site notice goes up, all the way through to major minerals and waste applications that suddenly come out of the blue.
Thank you. Councillor Poole.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Looking back at the original 1981 planning permission, it was for 12 larger caravans with 9 spots marked for touring caravans for visitors, because we all like to go and visit family. Why not? And in this plan, we are looking at 17 double length slots. And we have spoken about this with the applicant, but I'm conscious that this isn't so much as a redevelopment of an existing site, but more of a new development using existing land. And I wish to pose the question to Mr. Butler about the placement of the pitches and whether or not they are being placed systematically in order to support further occupancy moving forward.
Yeah, again, I'll do my best to answer this question. First of all, planning officers could have recommended to committee that we put on a maximum occupancy on the site as a condition, but that would have, first of all, been extremely difficult, first of all, to arrive at an appropriate figure, and secondly, to monitor and enforce that figure. And in my view, it was, well, not my view, it would certainly not meet the tests on conditions within the NPPF. The other thing members need to bear in mind, and I'll use not a city example, but a different example, is if the council grant permission for, let's say, 5 dwellings, what you don't then do is say, in those 5 dwellings, the future occupancy shall not exceed 15 people, because it would be wholly ridiculous. You couldn't do that. It's just, and it would serve no planning purpose. Again, in this case, if the officer, the DEPZ officer, the emergency officer, had said she would object if there were more than, let's say, 50 people on the site, then perhaps with that basis, we could have applied that condition, because there would have been a valid planning reason for applying that condition. But she has certainly not said that. What she has done, quite rightly in my view, is looked at the extant consent on the site, excuse me, for 18 pitches. This is actually a reduction anyway to 17 pitches, and said with the, if I may draw your attention to the emergency plan condition recommended in the agenda, and that is on page, I'll just get the appropriate page. I'll find that, yeah, condition 3. And that again is a, sorry, Gemma, that again is a precondition. So there will be no development on the site until the AWE emergency plan condition is satisfied. We consider that although the occupancy on the site may increase to perhaps 60 or 70 people, perhaps, I've no idea, we cannot and should not control that, because it would serve no planning purpose. I probably haven't answered that very well, but that's the way I view the situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for officers, please?
No.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bagdell, we can't call you back. Can we therefore move on to debate? Who would like to lead off, please? So Somner.
Get in first and then come back later, potentially. Tough one, this. We always knew it was going to be. And I've listened to some very, very emotive presentations, and totally understandable that they should be. I think for me, this is coming down to 4 basic points. The first one is the personal aspect of it, which, as I said, I understand, but in planning terms, which is what we're always reminded of, it doesn't really carry the weight that leads us to make a decision. And that's a very harsh way of putting it. And I'm sorry for anybody that doesn't like the way I've put it, but that's the way the planning committee works. The policies that were raised, I think always seem to come down to interpretation, and I'm content with what Mr. Butler has said and other officers have said with regards to the policies that are out there. Consultation, and it may be something that Mr. Bagnall was about to get up and say, I think we would all agree could have been done better. And I think we're looking at a time frame on this which has made it look worse, because from what Mr. Bagnall said, there were meetings held in 2018. The tragedy occurred after that. And this development and conversations for the development have been going on for quite some time for various reasons, not least of which the financial aspect, which has been brought up earlier on. So yes, could have been done better, could have been repeated, but I'm not wholly of the mindset that it hasn't taken place at all. And flooding is the other one, and the SUDS condition that members can now see on page 3 of 4 goes over one side of A4. I don't think I've ever seen a condition that goes over an entire page before. That to me is a considerable amount of work that will need to be put into achieving that condition and needs to still be signed off by the SUDS officer. We will need to get that buy-in from the SUDS officer, and I totally take Mr. Till's point earlier on and don't disagree with it at all. As we were moving through this conversation, I was actually thinking, I'm just going to ask for this to be deferred so that consultation can take place. But actually, I think the time frame that would be required on that just isn't realistic. And the sort of things that we would normally ask for applications to be deferred for clarity. And that's not going to give us clarity. It's just going to bring a load of potentially the same points or a load of issues being raised over what would need to be quite a long period of time. So having said that, I am starting to lean towards supporting this application. Happy to hear others' views. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Poole.
Thank you, Councillor Somner. I hear you on the SUDS. I have to admit I'm a slow reader, and I have very briefly tried to read some of these conditions here. And the thing that always sparks me is that they're looking at the surface water within the site, whereas the conditions of the road when it rains is actually very, very dangerous. And some of the surface water comes from the site, and some of it comes from natural blocking of drains and overflowing. And I live in the village. I live in Burfield, and it's one of my regular routes. And I'm concerned that I don't fully yet understand the impact from this SUDS. I read the SUDS application that was on the portal last night and read that feedback and hadn't quite expected this when I came in today. I share a concern that the impact to the main highway, which runs at national speed limit, could be further impacted if we get this SUDS wrong. And I don't think we're actually going to know that until the development is in flight. And I think for me, I kind of want to get under the bones of this a bit more. And I would probably lean towards a deferment whilst we get that information, so that we are all on the same page and we're not rushing to read documents at a meeting.
So, Councillor Cottam.
Yes, I'm very concerned about the flooding. Okay, a little bit of history here. I was in Thatcham when we had the floods there. That was exceptional. A storm decided to just halt above Thatcham and poured the rain down. So I'm uncomfortable with the lack of agreement from the SUDS officer. Maybe I can be reassured that he will have the final say in the conditions, but that we must be able to meet that. It's quite concerning. So it's a serious matter. Okay, it may be once in a lifetime, but that once in a lifetime is once too many. So I sympathise with the parish view on that point. As to numbers, we're talking a lot about the safety zone around AWRE. And surely there is a maximum number that can be put on this. Is the day houses, the day rooms?
Day rooms.
Yeah, the day rooms. What is the feasible extent of people who can shelter in there? That's got to be a red line. If they say that it's only suitable for 4 people, then that must be respected. If it's not, those day rooms are not sufficient for them for 8 people, then obviously we must decline this. I think in general, I'm supportive of Councillor Sumner, but I do have these 2 concerns.
Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm very pleased that both officers and members have recognised the emotional nature of this application. I think it'd be impossible not to. And I was struck very much by PC Harper's mother in her submissions. And of course, my colleague Councillor Sumner, who I very rarely disagree with, is quite right in terms of material planning considerations not always matching up to the strength of feeling. But what I would say is that actually, when you have a policy in the development plan, as we've seen, which requires community engagement, and where the design and access statement promises engagement, which doesn't happen, in this sort of application with the emotion and the importance of local residents, it's even more important that that happen properly, right? This is not a garden shed we're talking about here. And I was disappointed, I have to say, with some of the statements which diminished or sought to diminish a policy in the development plan or a statement in the design and access statement, because it wasn't a policy. It's in the policy and it's in the planning application. And I think it's really important for the residents, for the public acceptance of the site, that is done properly. On the comments about the condition and the suds and the drainage, I'd be very interested to hear what Councillor Mace has to say about that, because I know he's a bit of an expert. But I guess the fact that the condition is so long really adds weight to the point that really this should be bottomed out before it's approved. And I think I'd be quite keen. I'm definitely leaning towards having this application deferred until that's bottomed out, and also until a consultation is done. I mean, I take Councillor Sumner's point about whether it's realistic or not, but some form of community engagement was promised in the application. It's in the development plan, and it really should happen if we're going to take the community with us. And on an application like this, that is of utmost importance. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I think actually I agree with much of what Councillor McKinnon has just said. I'm also concerned about the lack of consultation, particularly as it was expressed in that design and access statement. And I think about some of the other applications that I've been involved in, and I would have been furious if something like this had occurred, where a consultation had been promised, and promised, perhaps going too strong, but it makes it quite clear in this document that this should have happened, and then it doesn't happen. Also, I've read through. I'll be honest, I hadn't really looked at this SUD statement, and I'm not an expert on SUDs, but I would like to examine that in a little more detail and perhaps get a better understanding of exactly what that all means. I think the direction I'm moving in is that I would support the deferment, in particular, so that there should be some further consultation with members of the public. I'm not certain that it's going to. I mean, except say it is a very emotive concern, and whether I am perhaps a little bit worried as to whether that really will make any difference. But I think in all the circumstances considered, it would be better if we did that.
Are there any other points? In that case, would someone like to make a proposal?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to propose to defer this application until such time that we have further clarity on on SUDS and the rest of the application, and the public consultation with the residents has been complete.
Does that proposal find a seconder, please? Councillor Buchanan. Okay. I will therefore call a vote. So all those in favour of the proposal, please. So anybody against? I think that proposal is carried. So the item will be deferred to allow further consultation to be carried out and for the sustainable drainage system officers' concerns to be addressed. Thank you. So I propose that we have a short break before we take on the next matter. So 10 minutes. So we resume at 25 past.
Yes.
catch up. We'll move on to the item 3 on our agenda. Sorry, well, item 2. I beg your pardon. Sorry. Item 2, which is the application 23/00879/full at 6A Victoria Road, Mortimer Common. Can I ask planning officers to introduce the item, please?
Thank you, Chairman. This application is for the relocation of the previously approved kitchen extraction system, in particular, the discharge point or the flue. The site is located within the settlement boundary of Mortimer, and the application has been called in on environmental grounds due to concerns to the local residents. The officer's recommendation is for conditional approval. The main issues pertaining to this application is the principle of the development, the effect of the proposal on the character and appearance of the surrounding area, issues relating to neighbouring amenity and particularly concerns arising with respect to environmental health and any potential negative impact on the highway safety. As you can see from the location plan, the site is part of a primarily residential area. It's in use as a bistro restaurant currently. There is if you just look at the cursor, there is a convenience shop that is opposite and a hairdresser's to the rear. There is also an extant planning permission for a bedroom on the second floor space, but this was never built out due to the available headroom. The aerial view also shows the convenience shop and the hairdressers to the rear. By way of context, the area that's affected by the proposal is just here, and I'll show you a closer image in a second. You can see it's set back from the main highway of Victoria Road. The image on the left shows the current louver, which is just obscured by this drainage pipe here. And as you can see, it's located towards the rear of the building, and the image on the right shows a better view. It's currently circa 2.2 meters above ground level, and you can see it's discharging into a neighbouring garden, which isn't ideal. And this is just the existing showing that it's 2.2 meters high, and it's currently discharging horizontally again into the neighbouring garden, which isn't ideal. The proposal seeks to relocate the ductwork run vertically to 1 meter above roof level, which is circa 7 meters above the ground level, which is in line with industry standards and recommendations. The colour and material of the flue will be in line with the existing drainage pipework to reduce any negative impacts on the design. This slide shows that measures have been taken to add anti-vibration mounts to stop any issues pertaining to noise. The bit in particular that's of interest is here because it shows the anti-vibration rubber and mounts there. So to summarise, and I think it's important to stress that the proposal is an improvement on the existing situation, and there's no change of use involved or any change to any internal systems or filters or anything. It's purely just to extend the external ductwork run to allow for a higher discharge point, which is basically for more optimum air dispersal. I think due to the location of the site and the proximity to the neighbouring properties, it's impossible to have zero impact with respect to odour. But what this proposal seeks to do is minimise it as much as is reasonably practicable. The appearance of the materials would be in line with what is in the surrounding area and the surrounding drainage downpipes. There aren't considered to be any impacts with respect to the safety of the highways. And to secure the neighbouring amenity of the surrounding residents, there is a condition that is proposed that would ensure that the applicant ensures to a cleaning and maintenance schedule, so no more odours arise as has been the case presently. And as per the update sheet, there are no changes to any conditions and the recommendation remains as conditional approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Could we go to the Parish Council representative, which is Councillor Bridgman again, please?
He's just joining us, Chairman.
Thank you. Welcome again.
Takes a while coming in, Chairman. I hope you can hear me.
Can hear you. 5 minutes as usual. Would you like a?
I don't think I'm going to need the entire 5 minutes, Chairman. So,
thank you,
Chairman, members. This application was considered by the Planning Committee of Stratford-on-Wood Parish Council on the 30th of May. Now, at that stage, we had the consultation response from Environmental Health dated the 10th of May, I think, but we referred to effectively the subsequent consultation, the second consultation response from Environmental Health dated the 7th of July, because we basically said that we had no objections to relocation of the extractor vent, but we noted the 10th of May comments from EH and would support that response and looked to the council to ensure that both the environmental issue of odours were addressed and any subsequent nuisance caused by the way in which this site was vented were addressed. Now, we indeed had the benefit of presentation from the objectors, Mr. and Mrs. Howman, who were with us in that committee meeting, and we had a good discussion with them. What the committee concluded was that the proposal should improve the emissions situation. At the end of the day, I suppose we thought that it was better to have the external extractor funneled into a flue than simply giving emissions where it was sited on the wall. And we also concluded that if it didn't improve the situation, then it would be back to Environmental Health to deal with that as a matter of statutory nuisance. And indeed, I think that is borne out by the second response from EH dated the 7th of July, where there's a whole load of stuff in that response about the filters on the extractor fan and so on and so forth. But certainly our conclusion is that this is a better situation than we currently have. And if it doesn't solve anything, well, then the applicant has to do something else, but at least we're moving forward. I would just say two other things, Chairman. One, I would suggest to officers that to describe the Co-op supermarket as a convenience shop won't go down too well with the proprietors. And secondly, just a suggestion to officers that when you adjourn a meeting, maybe you'd like to put the adjournment notice up on YouTube. I sat there watching you all moving around instead of watching a sign saying we're adjourned. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. To ward members, do you wish to address the committee, Councillor Poole and Councillor? Sorry. Councillor Mays, do you wish to address the committee, or do you want to wait until the debate? Okay. In that case, could I call Councillor Carter, please? Sorry. Oh, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. Sorry, Graham. Are there any questions for Councillor Bridgman? Sorry for ignoring your indication. Thank you, Graham.
I wish you a fond farewell, Chairman.
Are we going to ask him questions or not?
No. Do you require a time of warning?
Yes, please, because I might ad lib a couple of things that aren't in the script.
So a minute before.
Yeah, fine. Okay, so it's an interesting example of consultation, actually. I called this in. I contacted the colleagues on Stratfield Mortimer Parish Council. By the way, at the risk of confusing the public, I'm on that parish council as well. But what I've just heard makes me feel like I'm living in a different universe. I contacted them in June, highlighting to them that there were unaddressed issues highlighted in the environmental health report, and that 2 adjacent properties reported regular unpleasant odour. My comments were frankly dismissed, claiming that 1, environmental health is not a planning matter, and 2, the odours had been reported by the residents at that planning committee meeting as gone after 2 days. On the first point, I understand, and I am new to this, it's incorrect. The potential for, and I quote, hopefully from a reliable source, proposed development which could cause, for example, air pollution, would be the concern of environmental health officers. Such developments may also require environmental impact assessment. Environmental health departments work alongside planning in most local authorities. This would seem to be why environmental health are on the statutory consultation list, I would have thought. And the supporting paper actually uses the words, planning includes consideration of sensible measures for control of odour when considering a new development. New development may be significant, but that was the context of where I got to. I had to find this out myself with help from officers. The second point the parish council raised is untrue as well. The resident made clear to me at the time, and I informed the parish council, that they firmly believe the odours remained. So their view of consultation is at best unhelpful. And I'm on that council, so God help the rest of us. But bringing the story up to date, on September the 10th, an objector, which is the adjacent but one neighbour, wrote in relation to the suggestion that the filters fitted to the extractor would bring the odours down to acceptable levels, that we can honestly say there has been no difference to the offensive greasy odours emitted on a daily basis. They also say this will be quite an unsightly addition, and there is no guarantee it will make a difference. So I note that the resident also raises some unrelated concerns which aren't to do with planning, to do with parking. So I'll ignore that for a second. So I think what I'm just saying, before making a determination, I'd pose these questions. I don't think they've all been answered yet to me, and I apologise if they have, by officers who've been very helpful in this. 1, was the extractor fit for purpose in the first place, as in, can it work there, given the neighbours with the filters fitted or not? Was it big enough to do the job? Is it simply too close? When we approved it originally, yes or no? Second question is, if it was okay when we originally approved it, why, if the resident is correct, has the filters not removed the odour? And the answer to that may be it just needs a follow-up with environmental health. So you could, in principle, approve on that basis. Will the addition of the duct result in a reduction of odours, noting that the filter should have removed them in the first place anyway? And can this be quantified? And then the other point is, if when that first floor of the building is occupied, in fact, I think the first floor is occupied, will the residents of that be affected by the stuff coming out just by their window, or potentially? And I suppose in summary, if the answers to those questions are yes, to be advised, to be advised, to be advised, and no, if you follow my 5 questions. And is the proposal unsightly, which I think is probably something you should consider, then I would support it, with just the caveat that I would hope the council treat the overall issue as a whole, meaning if we approve it on technical grounds, which appears to make sense, if there is a persistent unreasonable odour, we've got to recognise that the long-term outcome could be an abatement order in the extreme, or the matter does go away. So I hope that helps, but I'm happy to take any questions. I'm sorry if I went on.
Are there any questions for Councillor Carter? Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Does anybody have any questions of officers, please? No? Move into debate. Would anybody like to lead off? Councillor Somler?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the information's in front of us. I think Councillor Bridgman summed up the position from the parish, and I think the intention to make the changes is going to make all the differences that everybody's looking for. I'm quite happy to propose this early doors, Chairman.
Thank you.
Seconded, Chairman.
Okay. I'd just like to raise one point with officers. Presumably, if there's still an ongoing problem, environmental health would get involved again, and then may require some further work. So.
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that, as outlined in the update sheet, Environmental Health have powers under the Environmental Protection Act 1990 to take action in respect of odour which can be identified as a statutory nuisance under that legislation. So yes, they can re-involve themselves and take action.
Thank you. In that case, we have a proposal, officer's recommendation. Could I have, could everybody who's in favour of the proposal please show? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So that application is given conditional permission. So could we please move on then to the third application this evening, which is number 22 stroke 01953 stroke full D reservoir covered in Bishop's Road, Tuts Clump, Bradfield South End. And could I ask the officers to introduce the item, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so this application is for the demolition of the existing water pumping infrastructure on the reservoir covered site at Bishop's Road, Tuts Clump, replacing it with a detached 5-bed dwelling with integral garage. It's been called into committee to discuss the proposal's compliance with the policy C1 of the HSA DBD, in particular related to whether it's within a cluster of dwellings. The officer's recommendation is for refusal. The application site is in Tuts Clump, which doesn't have a defined settlement boundary and is within the North Wessex Downs AONB. The site sits in a corner location with Bishop's Road to the east, and to the south is Cock Lane. To the north are a linear row of dwellings, and to the south is Boot Farm Stables and Stud, which is down here. There's a group tree preservation order within the rear of the site, and sitting on that southeast corner is a single TPO. You can see the red line also includes visibility displays for the existing access. So this is just a picture taken from the design and access statement of the existing site even. So this is the two buildings on the site. I think one now has got the canopy removed, and then there's the covered mound at the back, which is the covered reservoir. There's a mixture of hard and soft landscaping in the site, and it is visible within the street scene. So the proposal itself will include the dwelling with the integral garage to the south projection, and then there's also a 2-storey rear projection, which is set down from the main bulk of the 2-storey dwelling. There'll be a mixture of hard and soft landscaping. They'll be using the existing access, and there will be at the rear of the site a partial retention of the existing mound. This just clearly shows how the built form will be represented on the site through the roof plan. So the 3 types of the built form. And these are the elevation drawings. And this is the rear and the other side elevation drawing. I'd like to draw the attention to section 2 of the officer's report, in particular the planning history. So there is recent history on the site, which is a significant consideration for this application. That is application 22-00697-4D. It was refused on the principle of the development, the impact of the rural character of the area, the impact on the North Wessex Downs AONB, and insufficient information to rule out any harm for trees. The applicant appealed this decision, and in August of this year, the inspector dismissed the appeal, upholding the following reasons for refusal: the principle of the development and the impact on the rural character of the area. A copy of those reports were annexed to the report. This application is similar to that one. It revises the size of the integral garage. It changes the roof form of the rear projection and changes some of the fenestration details from that previously submitted. I turn your attention to section 4, which is the consultation responses. So no objections have been received from the parish council, the highways officer, the lead local flood authority, archaeology officer, Thames Water, and environmental health. Though some of these consultees have recommended conditions to deal with details. Matters of trees and ecology were resolved during the course of the application. We've also received 2 letters of support with this application, and these consider that the site is a good opportunity for residential development that would improve the visual appearance of the site, and that the proposal would be in character with the area. Now turning to the appraisal of the application. So the report sets out the relevant policy considerations in the context of the spatial strategy and the policies for housing. Policy C1 of the housing site allocations DPD advises that there is a presumption against residential development outside of a settlement boundary. However, the policy lists specific exceptions to this, which are consistent with the NPPF ensuring that rural needs are met. The application sought to demonstrate that it met the limited infill development in a settlement without any defined settlement boundary. The appeal decision on the previous application has informed the officer's view that the proposal would not meet the exception for the limited infill development. This is just an aerial context of the site, but infill usually consists of developing a plot in which there's development on either side. The appeal decision identifies that to the south is the intervening road and an equestrian use further to the south, and to the east and west, there is non-residential land or undeveloped land. Whilst there is residential development to the north, due to the other surrounding uses, it's considered as not part of the closely knit cluster of 10 or more existing dwellings, which is required by criteria I of the policy. Furthermore, the inspector considered that it would be extending an existing frontage and therefore would not comply with the criteria I in the policy. A frontage in the context of policy C1 is buildings fronting a highway forming a broadly linear pattern of development. The existing site is not part of this existing linear frontage. The appeal decision considered the visual difference between the site and the residential development to the north means that the frontage would be extending southwards. So the previous one was looking north from Bishop's Road, almost standing in front of the equestrian site opposite. And this one's looking down Cock Lane westwards towards the site, so you can see the oak tree at the front. By extending the frontage, it would also undermine the existing relationship of the settlement with the open countryside. The proposal doesn't meet all the criteria for limited infill development and therefore does not meet the exception in policy C1. It was also considered that it didn't meet any of the other exceptions within this policy. The appeal decision also took the view that the conflict with the development plan was not outweighed by the previously developed land status of the land, and this is also the view taken in this application. It was therefore considered the proposal does not comply with the development plan. Regarding the impact of the character of the area, the appeal decision identified that the residential dwelling on the site would harm the rural character of the area. It was identified that the site had open quality and it was in a prominent position due to its corner location. The replacement of the low-key structures with a substantial dwelling would have a significant impact in extending the residential built form and dominating urbanising, particularly from when viewed from Cock Lane to the south. We note the revisions made to this application. However, we feel that it still remains a substantial dwelling that will significantly impact on the rural character, particularly when viewed from Cock Lane. It did acknowledge that there would be some visual benefit by removing the existing structures on the site and that there isn't a harm to the North Wessex Downs A and B. However, the proposal is considered not to be acceptable in terms of the rural character of the area. As you'll see from the report, we considered there was sufficient separation and the size of the plot it's set due to the size of the plot and the position within the plot, and therefore the impact on neighbouring amenity could be mitigated through way of conditions. This is just a view taken from the north, looking towards the north boundary with the nearest neighbour there. You can see from the following plan that there were visibility displays provided for the existing access. There's parking also within the site, and highways officers were satisfied with the details and recommended that most of these could be secured by condition. During the course of the application, additional information was received with regard to reptile species, and this was the same information that was submitted at appeal. As part of the appeal, the inspector advised that the information to date was sufficient and recommended a precautionary post, and we also recommend that this could be conditioned as part of the application. During the course of the application, we also received further information with regards to trees and the impact of the works to the bund at the back of the site. And the tree officer advised that by way of conditions that this could be dealt with. In other matters, the report also addresses things like land contamination and flooding and drainage and recommends conditions to deal with these. It is acknowledged that there was support for the proposal and that there would be benefits delivered by the proposal, including improving the visual appearance of the site, the delivery of one additional house and the associated economic and social benefits of this. However, the site is in an inappropriate location for residential development due to the conflict with the development plan and the harm to the rural character of the area. The recent appeal decision informs this weighting given to these matters, placing limited weight to the benefits while giving significant weighting to the conflict with the development plan. Significant weighting is given to the development plan having regard to appeal precedent, the policies being broadly consistent with the NPPF and the housing need and supply considerations. And significant weight has also been attached to the harm to the rural character of the area. Therefore, these matters have outweighed the benefits. The officer's recommendation is for refusal of planning permission due to the conflict with the development plan and the harm to the rural character of the area. Thank you. I've just got a few images at the end. Oh, sorry, that's a tree survey plan and landscaping plans. And then this is the site's southern boundary. So further to the south would be Cock Lane. This is looking from the southeast corner of the site. So that's some of the existing buildings, and you can see behind that the neighbouring dwelling. This is the rear boundary of the site. And that's just looking within the site east, and so you can see on the opposite side of the road the undeveloped land. And that's just looking from the top end of Bishop's Road, looking down northwards towards the site. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could we go now to the parish council? And would the parish councillor please come forward to the desk? So it's Councillor Andrew House from Bradfield Parish Council. You have 5 minutes. Would you like to have a warning when you say a 1 minute warning towards the end?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman. My name is Andrew House. I'm here to represent Bradfield Parish Council this evening. Bradfield Parish is a rural parish enjoying the benefits of peaceful tranquility within the North Wessex Downs area of outstanding natural beauty, particularly around our hamlets and scattered housing. We enjoy the benefits of open countryside and well-maintained housing and gardens across our parish around the rural lanes. And then there's this eyesore of the reservoir past its useful life, spoiling all that surrounds it. For years, following the reservoir being taken out of service, Bradfield Parish Council were longing for the site to be redeveloped with something more in keeping with the rural domestic life. Commercial redevelopment was never going to be pretty or likely because of redevelopment cost. There was essentially a brownfield site ideal for housing. Properties locally are larger dwellings, and the site has sufficient area to accommodate this proposal. The Parish Council has read, understands and respects the planning inspector's appeal decision for a previous application on this site. It would be oh so simple to take that dismissal and copy and paste elements onto this application. For many years of attending the West Berkshire Eastern Area Planning Committee meetings for Bradford Parish Council, I know that councillors on this committee are above all of that. We accept that there are policies where this application doesn't quite adhere. The planning inspector acknowledged that the scale of the dwelling and the plot were commensurate to the substantial dwellings on Bishop's Road. The element of a cluster was also considered in paragraph 9 of the appeal statement, mentioning extension of a cluster rather than infill. Bradford Parish Council would argue or would agree that adding to the end, be that into a garden or into a greenbelt land, wouldn't be looked at favourably. This is a previously developed site, so could be viewed as part of a cluster development and does not extend the existing frontage. The planning inspector noted that conversion of the building would have been acceptable within policy on previously developed land. The likelihood is that reuse of the current pump house would have been thought as in front of the domestic building line and therefore refused. The proposed dwelling is set back in line with other properties along Bishop's Road and reduces in bulk towards Cock Lane to address previous concerns. The planning inspector also notes this proposal will not harm the special qualities of the ANOB. There will be retained screening from protected trees, additional screening to the front, and will have some visual benefit. This will be an additional unit of accommodation for what is essentially a windfall site. This will contribute both still and ongoing council tax revenues to the local authority. The site is only a short distance from local services, and the planning inspector appeal decision notes reaching these services and facilities by walking or cycling would not be unreasonable, inconvenient, or unsafe. There is need for some common sense applied to this application. This is an opportunity to tidy up an area of the parish that is so out of keeping with its surroundings. There will be economic benefits to West Berkshire ongoing. It's a windfall site, admittedly only one dwelling, but every little helps towards the delivery of housing requirements. The Parish Council trusts that you will consider this favourably and no objection to this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you just remain in case there's any questions? Are there any questions from members, please? Oh, Councillor McKinnon.
Just one very quick question, Chairman. Thanks. Councillor House, how long has that reservoir been on that site, sort of sitting there?
The reservoir has been on there longer than my memory of living in the parish.
And the buildings on top?
And the buildings on top, yeah. So in excess of 65 years.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, could I just ask, I can't remember whether you said it was it the parish council or planning committee of the parish council that?
Parish council.
Parish council. Were you unanimous in the view that you've expressed, or was there a split decision?
No, when this application came before the parish council, I was in fact chair. And at that stage, it was unanimous that there was no objection to the application or this application.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We don't have any objectors, but we have one supporter, Tim Whale. Would you like to come forward to the microphone, please? And you also have 5 minutes. Would you like a warning? You wouldn't like
no,
one.
I'm fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, good evening. My name is Tim Whale. I was born in Tutsclump in 1957. This is where I grew up and this is where I live. So I've known this site all my life. I am also a member of Bradford Parish Council for the last 23 years. First, a bit of history. Dr. Herbert Watney, a philanthropist, born in 1843 and died in 1932, owned and lived in a big estate in Buckhold, which is now St Andrew's School. He was an ardent churchman, a supporter of missions overseas, and although a member of the Watney family of brewers, was a strict teetotaler. Around 100 years ago, he built several water boosting stations in the area to supply water to surrounding villages. This one at the corner of Bishop's Road was the main one where a house was built alongside for a water board employee to live. He was responsible for the daily operation and maintenance of all those local water booster stations, which each consisted of 2 huge brick-built water tanks covered in soil and grass, creating a mound to disguise them. Around 20 years ago, when the last employee who lived here for many years retired, Thames Water decided not to replace him, but a man would come out from Reading every day with a van. So they sold this half of the plot. It was purchased by a builder who demolished the fairly small house and replaced it with the huge property which stands there today. Around 10 years ago, all the booster stations were decommissioned as water was now pumped directly from Thatcham and the sites were sold off. This one was bought by a builder from Newbury who planned to build 2 houses on the plot and was the person responsible for removing the soil on 2 sides of the mound to have a better idea of what was underneath. This is why it is in the unsightly mess you see today, which is an irony in an area of outstanding natural beauty. However, he decided not to proceed as he had several other projects in the area at the time, so he sold it. This time it was purchased not by a builder or developer, but a private individual who wants to build a home for himself to live. No one has objected to this application, and it is supported by local residents and the parish council, and as far as I can see is rejected on technicalities, not practicalities. I will give one example. All new builds now have to provide a charging point for an electric vehicle. One of the points of refusal by the planning officer stated, this site is unsustainable because anyone living here would need a vehicle to access local amenities, which is rather contradictory. So finally, the question is, what would this piece of land be used for if planning for a house is refused? Presumably, it is already classed as an industrial site, so has business use by default. So could have a small factory or vehicle repair workshop, could be used to store shipping containers or sold to travellers and filled with static caravans. So in summary, I think this application be considered on its own merits and not a box-ticking exercise, and that common sense prevails. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you just remain there in case members have any questions? Do members have any questions?
Chairman, abuse of my question is just to say thank you. It was very interesting to hear the history.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Could I call on the agent, Tony Thorpe, please? And again, you have 5 minutes. Would you like?
If you could remind me, please,
1
that would
minute
be very, very helpful. Good evening. We're here to determine whether planning permission should be granted as an exception to policy and in the public interest. The policy in question is C1, and this sets out the general requirements for new residential development in relation to small villages, such as Tuts Clump, that have no agreed settlement boundary. The reason the proposal is seen as an exception to C1 is because the policy was never designed to deal with the unique circumstances of the site before you, for the following reasons. Firstly, it's a corner site, and the policy simply doesn't consider this eventuality. Secondly, the site has not 1 but 2 road frontages, one to Bishop's Road, the other to Cock Lane. C1 only deals with single frontages. Thirdly, it's a previously developed brownfield site containing permanent buildings, and the policy doesn't address this or the attendant presumption in favour of redevelopment. Fourthly, the built-up frontage of the village has a 70-degree dogleg. We did see an air photo a little bit earlier that shows that. That turns south towards the site, and the policy only realistically applies to a straight linear frontage. Now, approving the application as an exception to policy won't undermine policy C1 or establish a precedent. That's because the circumstances I've mentioned are so unique. Also unique is the fact that there are no public or parish objections to the scheme. In fact, there is overwhelming local community support for its environmental benefits. At paragraph 4.4 of the officer's report, they mention a single concern from Mrs. Pippa Jones regarding scale, but this was in fact in relation to the previous larger scheme, and along with the previous concerns of the parish, these objections have now been fully addressed by the improved scheme now before you. Local residents want you, as their representatives, to support their strongly held views that the ugly and inappropriate permanent buildings on site are demolished and replaced by an attractive detached dwelling, matching in scale and context the adjoining dwelling Oak House. A further local concern is uncertainty, in that unless replaced, the vacant buildings are bound to attract bad neighbour uses to the detriment of local amenity and the occupiers of adjoining Oak House. Residents say that because the site is bounded on two sides by highways and separated from the adjoining open field by a fence and a row of TPO trees, then there are defensible physical boundaries that stop any possibility of further development outside the boundaries of this site. So approving this development doesn't open the floodgates for further development. It isn't the thin edge of the wedge. Rather, it simply rounds off as a bookend the existing residential frontage. Your officers agree the development won't affect the AONB, that the site's sustainable with no highways or environmental health objections, no TPO or ecological objections, no height, massing, corner orientation or building line objections, and importantly, no effect on the residential amenities and privacy of adjoining Oak House. Of course, whose occupants fully support the proposal, and we've discussed it with them at length. And there's no other adjoining properties to be affected. The PO says the development would urbanise the view from Cock Lane. Well, we say an urban view entering the village is infinitely preferable to an industrial one. A pre-app's advice was reasonably favourable at the time of purchase, which is why the site was so attractive as a site for a self-build forever home by the applicant. The planning officer then did a U-turn with a second negative pre-app's opinion that was withheld from us for 6 months whilst a freedom of information request was processed.
You've got 1 minute left.
Oh, thank you. If members are concerned by this, I do have clarifying information to hand. Also, since the application turns on whether there is a built-up frontage, I can also provide clarifying dictionary definitions of frontage and why there is a national presumption in favour of developing this brownfield site after the presentation. In fact, the only obstacle to redevelopment, in accordance with the people's wishes, is Policy C1, which, although it has good intentions, it's simply too inflexible and too prescriptive to deal with the very special circumstances of this exceptional case. We think the people's vote needs to count for something here, and we trust that members will support the reasonable wishes of the local electorate that the unattractive pump house is replaced by a well-designed dwelling in keeping with its surroundings. Thank you.
Thank you. Right on the dot. Thank you. Could you remain there for any questions? Do members have any questions, please? Getting off lightly.
Oh,
thank you very much. Ward member, would you like to address the committee?
I will just briefly. Thank you, Chairman. I called this application in the event of a refusal. Given the local support that there is for the application, as ward member, I've received many representations along the lines that you've heard already from the people speaking. As we've heard, a similar application was refused on appeal very recently, although the application in front of us just now is amended, has already been said. The main reason I called it in, though, is not because of the local support, although that is significant. It's that in a case like this, a site visit is so important. Actually going up and seeing the site and assessing the planning policies in that context. I wanted the committee to have the opportunity to do that. And I'm glad that they did so. I'm looking forward to hearing my colleagues in the committee's thoughts. And, well, I thank the chairman of the committee for hearing the application.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor McKinnon, please? Okay. Can we move on then to questions for officers? Anybody have any questions for the officers? Councillor Mays.
Yeah, Gemma, sorry. You mentioned earlier on that the brick-built tank reservoir had originally been covered with earth and had been partly removed. But what part has been left that we?
Sorry, just to clarify, it is proposed at the moment, it's fully there. What they're proposing to do is remove some of it. If you were looking to recommend approval, we'd put a condition on for ground levels to clarify exactly how much they were going to retain as part of the proposal. At this stage, it wasn't fully outlined.
Aren't you going to remove the lot?
The block plan shows there will be a partial retention of the back of the site of the mound that currently screens the covered
Have you got
reservoir.
a photograph of it? You can show, please. Again. Unfortunately, we didn't get these photographs with the agenda pack, which is why we are asking these sort of questions now.
So that's the site photo that is kind of close to what there currently is on site. So it's this.
It's not on the screen yet.
Oh, sorry.
Right.
Yeah. So when they're referring to the partial retention of the mound, they're referring to this mound here, and it's a part of the rear of this mound that they're intending.
I don't really see the point in keeping it. That's the thing.
I believe
Unless
that's
it's
a
part
kind
of
of
a feature in the garden.
a design for the applicant. I don't know the answer as to why they want to retain it, but that was part of the proposal.
I think that's down to the applicant, Jeff.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I realise that.
Are there any other questions, please? Councillor Pemberton.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Policy C1 obviously deals with the issue of infill development. And in the updated report that we've been provided with this evening, that goes on to define frontage to help us understand what that means. But what isn't clear is where that explanation of frontage has come from. Could one of the officers clarify the source of that and how it applies in the context of this planning policy? Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll take that question. The explanation of frontage is in line with a great deal of appeal history in terms of interpreting this policy over a number of years since it was first adopted in 2017. I believe that within a few months of the policy being adopted, we had the first appeal interpreting it. That's gone on to further, a great many number of further decisions. And the inspector's decision in respect of this application that you've been presented with tonight is fully consistent with the direction of decision making from other inspectors on that policy. So the interpretation of frontage is a matter that is set out in terms of looking at how we are interpreting infill really in this particular case. And we are interpreting it with a certain nod to linearity of form of the development along a road. So that's where the officers and inspectors' interpretation that this would extend an existing frontage comes in to play. I actually professionally view this as a difficult one to argue anything contrary to. There is an established line of dwellings that front a road, and this particular dwelling is beyond them. Along the other road, as mentioned by the agent, there is no established line of dwellings, and this dwelling would therefore not form part of any frontage at all on that road. I hope that clarifies it somewhat. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. Any other questions? Councillor Poole.
Thank you, Chairman. So I understand that this site is, it has a category of, I'm going to say this wrong, but is it sui generis? I'm going to be, is that right? That I pronounced that site correctly, Gemma? Yeah. Thank you. Yes. And as such, it's in its own, it is of its own kind. So there is no term to categorize those buildings. So my question is, what else could this building be used for, if not a residential dwelling?
I mean, there are very limited permitted development rights related to sui generis uses. So there's quite limited opportunities to use permitted development. I think when any other kind of application, it would be difficult to kind of comment and say what exactly could be built on the site. It would be in context of other policies, but I know in permitted development terms, there wouldn't be much they could do. If that helps, it does.
Just to clarify that, I presume that means that nobody could build a factory there or a warehouse or that kind of thing.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'll chip in on this one. Gemma's referred to permitted development rights, which are for replacement with essentially like for like. And in terms of sui generis, because sui generis means in and of a use class of its own individually, there is very little by way of permitted development right for replacement. In terms of how we might consider a future application on the site, that would very much depend on what the application was for and the policies that applied in terms of that application. So there may be scope for redevelopment of the site under a different policy. Under C1, there is a clear breach of that policy in terms of the extension of a building frontage. Sorry, I've got myself mixed up with building line and frontage here. But there are other policies in terms of rural business, for example, that may provide a greater weight for redevelopment of the site. And members are advised that this is considered to be a brownfield site. So there is a certain precedent for redevelopment of the site. The issue here is that the redevelopment of the site for residential purposes is contrary to policy.
Thank you. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, reading through policy C1, which you've kindly put before us, and noting underneath the table where it says that exceptions to this are limited to rural exception housing schemes, conversion of redundant buildings. Some clarity, please, on what conversion of that building, which is clearly redundant, would be.
Yes, if a conversion was proposed of that building, and I think members should possibly consider how practical it would be to convert that building to residential, then that may be allowed under the requirements of policy C1. Members should be mindful of the fact that conversion is very different from redevelopment. Redevelopment is essentially knocking most of it down and building something different. Their conversion is using the existing fabric of the building to reuse for something very similar to what exists on site at present.
Councillor Somner.
Just to expand that a little, Mr. Till, because you know it when you love it when I do that. So potentially, and this is going into the land of theory, I grant you, potentially, if the applicant were minded, they could go for a conversion, make it residential, and then that puts it into a potentially second conversation, should they be minded to raise a separate application to change the current and existing residential property that would be in place.
As a hypothetical, yes. I don't find myself confronted with many instances of applicants undertaking costly work to renovate a dilapidated and redundant building, only in order to knock it down and redevelop it for a new dwelling. But In the hypothetical, yes, absolutely.
Any other questions? Okay, there being no other questions, could we start the debate? Would someone like to lead off, please? Councillor Cotton.
Yeah, I'm always concerned about setting the precedent. It is, yeah, I mean, off the cuff, looks quite reasonable and a good solution. But it's the precedent that you widen up. You know, it's not just our officer's opinion here that has basically telling us that this is the right way to do it. It's been confirmed on appeal. And you've got some strength there. So, not that we need the inspector's confirmation of all our policies, but it adds weight. You going on the further speculation, I mean, I think I've watched some rather dubious program on developing houses where a nuclear military defense site, which actually they just put the door on the top and the house was underneath. There's another possibility, but you could speculate ad infinitum. So I just would say, while it looks reasonable on its own as a single site, when you look at it in policy and in the light of a approval by an inspector of our policy, I think just to let that go would set an unfortunate precedent.
Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks, and thanks for that, Councillor Cottam. And there was some interesting questions there. I guess it all hinges on, well, interpretation of some of the words in C1. So frontage, infill, cluster, and we've heard the officers' opinions, and of course they've done their job properly, and of course the inspector did his or her job properly. I can't remember which it was. I'm struck by a point that I think the applicant's agent made, was that policies by necessity are made to cover the whole district and to cover a multitude of different circumstances. And, having looked at the site and, having gone to visit it, I just wonder if there's a case here for undoubtedly it would be an exception to the policy when you go on what the inspector says. But based on what's there at the moment and the fact that it would extend a row of houses, but it'd be on the end of a load of houses, more than 10. But it's not a cluster because it's on the end. And yeah, it would change the existing building from a complete eyesore to something a lot more pleasant to look at. And I'm speaking early now. I wasn't planning on doing it, but just because of Councillor Cotham's point about Preston, I take his point about Preston. But I do think there's that other side to consider as well, as like, is this one of the cases? And that's why we have planning committees after all. Otherwise, we wouldn't need us to be here. Officers would just tick the box on policy all the time. Is this one of the cases that common sense prevails? I think it might be, but here we go.
Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. Those that have sat with me for long enough over the last 9 years on these committees will have heard me say this many times. If we're not here to do stuff by exception, then what are we here for? Councillor McKinnon has just said exactly the same thing. And in fact, Mr. Thorpe said the same thing earlier on. We have to look at things by exception. That's what we are supposed to do. And again, it would be highly remiss of me to sit here and down any planning policy that we have in place. I am fully aware of the importance of the planning policies that we have, and I've spent many, many hours with officers over the last few years looking at them in depth, as have you, Councillor McRae. We are policy driven, and that is massively important to us, and rightly so. What the inspectorate have done when they've looked at it, have looked at the case that we've put before them, and that says we have a policy and we've refused it on that basis. And my suspicion is they've looked at that and gone, yep, you're absolutely right. You've refused it on the basis of a policy that you have in place, and I can't go against that. Although sometimes I'm not sure that they don't actually think about it more than once. Interestingly, when you look at policy C1 and the list of areas that we've got, villages that we've got on that list. It says Bradfield. I'm guessing that most of us could throw a stone from Tuts Clump to Bradfield. Probably take a few windows out en route. But when you, as I always do, go in via Google, because that knows everything, and Wikipedia tells me that Bradfield includes the hamlet of Tuts Clump. The irony. This, I'm afraid, officers, is one of those cases where I would like to see policy make exception for something which will improve the area. It clearly is not something that is wonderful to look at the moment. It's not going to be used again for its previous use. And at some point it will start to crumble and it will become dangerous, despite the fencing that's been put up around in it, advising people to stay out. I am very much leaning towards a proposal which is against officers' recommendation. Happy to listen to other comments first, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, I think I would support much of what Councillor Sumner just said there. I'm obviously impressed by the fact that the parish council, and indeed was unanimous as you responded to my question in there, them wanting this this development to go ahead. A lot of references being made to the inspector's decision, and of course I've read that and I understand that, but of course this is a different application. I mean, I don't know quite know exactly how different it is, but so we can't presuppose what the inspector might say if this did go to appeal. It might well be a different decision. And again, I wasn't at the site visit, but I have examined this very closely on Google Maps, so I think I've pretty got a pretty good idea of what this looks like. And of course, I've seen the photographs, and it's a brownfield site. It doesn't look very pleasant to me at the moment. So my inclination is towards, I'd say with some regret, because this is one of my very early planning meetings, to go against our planning officer's advice. But I think that's probably what I'm inclined to do.
Thank you. I did look at the site. I went to the site visit, but I also looked at it on Google Maps and Google aerial photos, which I noticed were dated 2013. That might have been 2011. It was at least 10 years old, those over aerial. So, anybody, Councillor Poole.
Thank you, Chairman. I attended the site visit and it was very lovely to go to Bradfield again. And what sparked me was that, well, there was two things that sparked me. There was one, after walking through the village and walking around into the hamlet, you've got lots of extensions and some rather beautiful extensions to the properties there that seem to have a wow factor, let's just say, and therefore would make it not really in keeping with the traditional nature of the hamlet. And then when I read policy C1, I also realized that if we were talking about a plot of land between two houses, it probably would have gone through without even needing to come to committee. And we're really talking about being on a corner within an area. And listening to everybody today, Councillor Sumner really did raise some very elegant points earlier. And I mirror a lot of his comments, as I'm sure a lot of the other members do. And I'm a stickler for policy because I think the policy is there to protect the area and it's to protect the people. However, I'm probably leaning with what I believe to be the rest of my cohort here and going against recommendation to approve the site.
Thank you. Councillor Mays.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've read the document that was sent to us. I was a bit surprised when I saw that on the screen here, the size of the building that were proposed and the complexity of the actual house that's being offered for us to approve. I would tend to follow policy, but in this case, I think I am inclined to go against policy on this particular occasion, really to get a property on that site and to get the site cleared. That will be my main reason for doing so. Thank you.
Councillor Cotton.
Yep. Just in being helpful to the others here, can we not say we're going against policy? I mean, if you're saying you're interpreting policy that we would allow this, I'd feel a little bit more relaxed rather than saying, oh, we just decided to go against what the officers have said is the right direction. You might be saying that you interpret this as being in the right direction, but just uncomfortable, the conversation around here saying that we're going against officers' recommendation. What I think is maybe you're interpreting it. I would strongly disagree with that interpretation, but please, let's not have the committee here saying we're deciding to go against officers' recommendation. It's our interpretation. I've been on planning committees for 15 years. I chaired one, for 3 or 4 years. So I'm a little bit, the language being, I know this is really being pedantic and maybe a little bit nitpicking, but I am concerned. I'm concerned about the president. There's a disagreement. I accept that fully, but just let's be a bit more tactful, maybe.
Thank you. Councillor Somner.
3 times I get to keep the match ball. Comments noted and taken on board, and I agree with your sentiment absolutely. In counter of the officer's recommendation, my recommendation to committee is that we accept the application, that we do not accept refusal.
So 2 things. First of all, I think you'd be suggesting conditional permission.
Indeed.
And then we'd need some conditions, I think. The other thing is, I think if we're going to propose something against policy like this, we probably ought to have some reason for doing that, to cater for the issue of future applications coming in and using it as a precedent.
Then I will reuse a word that's been used earlier on this evening, which is betterment of the area.
Okay. Does that find a seconder? Councillor McKinnon, thank you. Could I ask for some suggested conditions?
Can I take area out of that and put street scene, because that's probably more appropriate in terminology.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Sumner. In preparation for the potential overturn on officer's recommendation, I did ask the case officer to have a look at some recommended conditions. So I'll pass over to Gemma for that.
Thank you. So conditions recommended are the commencement of development, approved plans, schedule of materials, arboricultural method statement, arboricultural supervision, spoil, ground levels and finished floor levels, drainage strategy, land contamination, unforeseen contamination, biodiversity enhancement, precautionary measures in reptile survey, obscure glazing of windows. Then there are conditions related to visibility displays, parking, cycle parking, electric vehicle charging points, setback of gates, surfacing of access, soft landscaping in accordance with plans, lighting strategy, the validity of the further ecology surveys, and a condition for the annex use to be even to be ancillary to the main dwelling. Some of those conditions are pre-commencement, so would need agreement before.
Would construction methods statement be required, do you think? Construction method.
Yeah, construction method statement. If you felt that the reasons for protecting neighbouring amenity or highway safety, then that would be, you could request the construction method statement.
Thank you. We have a proposal with a second. Sorry. Yes, sure.
Sorry, I just want to clarify really in relation to really what Councillor Cottam said. Are you saying that you think it's in accordance with policy, or are you saying it's an exception to policy because the material considerations outweigh the policy?
The latter, and thank you for putting it so eloquently.
Thanks. So we have a proposal for conditional permission. Could I have, could you show those in favour, please? And thank you. And those against? One against. Thank you. So the application is given conditional approval. Thank you very much. And I think that concludes the business for the evening. Thank you all very much, and thank you very much to the officers who have supported us. Thank you.